Chapter 1659. Something you can't say? Of course it's a little. Jaina replied directly. However, amidst her enchanting smile, her narrowed eyes were filled with mockery. Do I have to tell you what I'm whispering to my lover? With that, Jaina placed her hand, which was covered in a white glove, on the back of Duque's hand. She was clearly saying, I'm showing off my love. Do you want some dog food? Garush knew that he had been impulsive, but he did not regret it. His instincts as a warrior told him that the two were mocking him. He had always believed in his instincts. However, his actions were rather childish when it came to diplomacy. No, this could no longer be called diplomacy. This was a complete venting of anger. In the Northwind Tundra, the Warsong clan had suffered heavy losses from the betrayal of the Blue Dragon King, Maligos. Garush's performance as chief was mediocre. In the end, it was the former chief, Grom, who had already died, who came out to save the day. Garush could clearly feel that his subordinates' trust and evaluation of him had greatly decreased. The Warsong Beastman talked more about his father than him. Ever since that day, his temper had been like a powder keg, in a state where he would explode at the slightest provocation. Seeing him like this, Varrock felt a headache coming on. He stood up with a swoosh. Garush, don't be unreasonable. Sit down. You. Garush's neck was red. The bulging arteries and veins in his neck looked as if 2 sausages had been stuffed into them. This is the Northern Expedition Army, and this is the Supreme Commander of the Alliance. This is not your Warsong clan's hunting ground. If you continue to be rude, get the hell back to Orgrimmar. Varrock scolded sternly. In terms of status, Varrock Salyafar was the current chief of the Blackrock clan, on equal footing with Garush. In terms of status, as the supreme commander of the Great Chief, Salyafar had the authority to directly lead the entire Beastman army. During the tribal wars, even chiefs like Wajin and Kane had to listen to his commands. Garush, who was still inexperienced and had not even fully grasped the Warsong clan, did not have the confidence to challenge Varrock. Humph. After letting out a disdainful snort, Garush finally crossed his arms and sat down forcefully. Little did they know that in psychology, crossing one's arms in front of one's chest was actually a defensive posture that prevented one from communicating with the other party. Varrock said apologetically, sorry, Garush is a brat from Nagrand. Young and impulsive, Sir Marcus, please do not blame him. No, no. It's fine. Duque smiled and waved his hand. Of course, in his heart, Duque was laughing his head off. There would always be people with bad brains in this world. Should I say, brainless Roar is indeed brainless Roar? How ignorant and fearless. Who gave you the courage to use such a trivial reason to challenge a demigod? If the great chief of the tribe was an idiot, then Duque would not hesitate to take care of the tribe first. Since he was familiar with the course of history, Duque did not mind watching Garush go further and further down the road of seeking death. It was as interesting as watching a clown jumping around. On the other side, Jaina clapped her hands and a gnome wizard ran to the podium. Hello. Honorable Alliance Commander Marcus. Hello. Respected Sir Seraphar. I am today's host, Milhouse Mana Storm. The dwarf who spoke had a head of silvery white hair and a beard, as well as 2 rather eye-catching handlebar mustaches. He wore a blue wizard robe with golden edges and a pair of bright red trousers. He looked quite comical. What surprised Duque the most was his name. As a transmigrator, Duque would certainly not forget this incomparably famous and amusing gnome wizard. Gnomes were a highly intelligent race, and at the same time, they had a strong desire for knowledge. If there was a chance to use technology that they could not achieve to satisfy their thirst for knowledge, many people would do so. Of course, Milhouse did the same. In the original history, his first appearance was during the Burning Crusade. This guy intended to steal the Naru's spaceship and use the Naru's technology to explore the outside world. He stealthily boarded the ship of his dreams. But unfortunately, Kale, that's Blood Elf troops captured the Naru's spaceship. Then, to protect himself, Milhouse hid in the second cell. As a result, when the players were beating the boss of the anti-magic prison, this guy came out to help beat the boss. In history, Milhouse was a very famous person who caused a lot of trouble. In addition, he was the only wizard who survived after the teleportation failed and was lost in space. Duque just did not know why this amusing pharaoh would come here. He also did not know that this amusing pharaoh was already at the peak of the Radiant Moon realm and showed faint signs of breaking through to the Breaking Dawn realm. It was not that Duque was boasting, but as long as he personally helped Milhouse adjust the magic circuit, the Alliance would immediately have a third Breaking Dawn Great Wizard. It was just that this was quite unnecessary. First of all, it would affect Milhouse's growth. Secondly, once this guy entered the Breaking Dawn, they would have to find a position for him in the Dalajan, or at least one of the 6 members of the Kirin Tor Council. Then the question was, what would be the consequences of letting an amusing fool be a leader? The answer was, amusing was contagious. It would definitely be a nightmare to raise this crazy and curious gnome mage to the top. Duque would not be able to do anything and would be responsible for cleaning up Milhouse's mess all day long. Seeing Milhouse, Duque did not have time to say anything. Brainless Roar jumped out again. What is this? A lowly dwarf? Is there no normal people in the Alliance? Why should I listen to a lowly guy who can't even reach my knees? Brainless Roar's temper could be said to be unreasonable. He had a bad temper, and Milhouse was not easy to deal with. This irascible dwarf stood up with his hands on his hips, and the frost magic circuit worked rapidly. Almost instantly, an ice platform formed under his feet, lifting him to the same level as Gurus. Milhouse spat on Brainless Roar on the spot. Lowly? Buddy, I don't care who you are. No one dares to say that the mighty Milhouse is a lowly dwarf. Let me tell you, this is racial discrimination. My height difference with yours is at least 5 feet. Okay, maybe 6 feet. But so what? Do you believe that I can burn off your ugly legs with a fireball and reduce the height difference between you and me? At this moment, before everyone could react, another dwarf jumped out. I don't know what happened here, but I will be happy to deal with this unreasonable fool with Milhouse. What did you say? Brainless Roar clenched his fists and stood up. At this moment, Duque's leisurely voice was heard. Grom, control your son. Chapter 1660. As soon as Duque's voice fell, a tall, burly, green-skinned figure suddenly traversed through the void and appeared from a portal that had suddenly opened. Elder and younger Salyafar, the tribal guards behind them, as well as the Warsong Beastmen deputies behind Garrush, all had rather interesting expressions on their faces. Younger Salyafar's face was red, as if he was constipated. He wanted to laugh, but was too embarrassed to do so. This made Garrush even more embarrassed and angry. Mortals always yearned for an existence that transcended the mortal world, because such an existence could do many things that they couldn't. Mortals didn't like having a high and mighty existence binding them, because that would make them feel like slaves. Unfortunately, Azeroth was a magical world. Even before the opening of the Dark Portal, it had already been a place where gods frequently showed their divinity. As early as the end of the first battle at the Dark Portal, the appearance of the first Death Knight meant that the line between life and death had become blurred. The tribe could still accept Death Knights and the Forsaken joining the tribe, so the appearance of Grom Hellscream, who was a heroic spirit, was actually not strange at all. However, the existence that he hated the most had summoned his most helpless father to teach him a lesson. There was no need to mention how aggrieved Garrush felt. At this moment, if he could, Garrush would definitely want to kill Duque and let Duque fall completely or something. He couldn't do it. This was the so-called despair. Elder Howl raised his world-famous blood howl and smashed it at his son in a deep voice. Garrush, go to the arena. Let me see how much you've grown after I died. Have you become a great warrior? And a chief who can truly lead the tribe? Garrush was really in a state of shock. His neck, his cheeks, and his forehead were all protruding veins. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, he didn't even have a chance to object. In the tradition of the beast men, there was no need for a reason for the son to challenge the father, or for the father to teach the son a lesson. Since when could the son not listen to the father? Well, as long as you beat the father, that's enough. A battle between blood relatives was never a one-off deal. It could be repeated at any time. In any case, whoever won would have the final say. Before you become the victor, all the injustice and grievances you have, hold it in. Whatever orders the victors give you, you must obey them. Otherwise, you can die. If he really died, he would be spurned by all the other beast men. That's right, having a bigger fist was the hard truth. The barbaric traditional orcs believed in this to their very bones. Garrush had once defeated Grom, but he was like a candle in the wind, a Grom who had lost an arm and was about to die of old age. Thus, even if he took over the position of chief of the Warsong tribe from Grom, he would still be questioned. Being scolded as a tiger father and a dog son was the tragedy of almost all the second-generation heroes. No one would call you by your name. Instead, they would call you the son of so-and-so. They wouldn't even want to remember your name. Oh. You're the son of Grom Hellscream? This was the Horde version. Oh. You're Roar. This was the Alliance's version. Everyone would only remember how awesome and powerful Grom was. Before Garrush surpassed his father, this situation would not change at all. Even if Garrush surpassed Roar, as long as it wasn't by a huge margin, he would only be judged as dragons beget dragons, and phoenixes beget phoenixes. But was it so easy to surpass Roar's achievements? In this life, Roar killed an adult Goron by himself at the age of 14, making his name known throughout the Warsong tribe. When he was in his 20s, he participated in the war against the Draenei and was the vanguard in the attack on Shotrath City. After that, he participated in the first and second battle of the Dark Portal, suppressing Big Sister Windrunner and Second Sister Windrunner. At that time, he was the strongest in the Alliance, Anduin Lothar and other top experts in the Alliance. After that, when he was a slave in the Blackrock tribe and Thrall's prison camp, he led the Warsong tribe to fight against the humans in the forests and mountains of Lordaeron, never yielding. When Thrall escaped from Goldenhold Castle, he fought side by side with Thrall and Orgrim against the Lich King Arthas. Not long after, the orcs went west to Kalimdor, and Roar killed the Burning Legion's high-tier Void Lord Manaroth in Grey Valley. In the Battle of Mount Hyjal, they worked together to kill many Void Lords and were the main force in killing Archimonde. After that, it was the crusade against the Flame Demon King Ragnaros, the Black Dragon Prince Nefarian, and the ancient god Thun. Roar had fought for his entire life, and every battle was filled with a strong sense of legend. He had never lost, and at most, it was a draw. Such a great achievement, no matter how one looked at it, was 9 streets ahead of the young Garrush. At this moment, Garrush's round eyes were clearly saying things like, "Wouldn't it be better if you just died like this? Why did you become a human slave? Why did you come back to appear in front of me?" These eyes were very easy to understand. At the same time, there was also the hatred and anger towards Duque reflected in his eyes. Everything, fueled by the shame of his own strength and the faint fear of his father, was rising higher and higher. Although it was not to the extent of being uncontrollable, it seemed like it was only a matter of time before he lost control. "Let's go." Roar turned around and walked outside. Garrush followed like a zombie. On the other side, the young Seraphar and the 2 dwarf wizards were silent. Admittedly, if it had just been opened, it would definitely have been a blow to the slightly fragile relationship between the Alliance and the Horde. If someone with ulterior motives instigated or spread the news, it would undoubtedly destroy the relationship between the Alliance and the Horde. Only Garush would suffer. Was it really okay to do this? In this regard, King Seraphar's reaction was silence. Because among the younger generation of the Horde, Thrall valued his son Dranos the most. Both young Seraphar and Garush were excellent warriors. Although they both had the rashness of young orcs, young Seraphar had a better view of the overall situation. Young Seraphar would definitely take over as the chief of the Blackrock tribe in the future. But which father did not want his son to be more successful? As an old acquaintance of Grom, King Seraphar of course knew how terrifying Roar was at his peak. The title of the Horde's #1 warrior was not just for show. The scene of him teaching his son a lesson could not be any more beautiful. Even though he could vaguely feel that Duque was targeting Garush, King Seraphar still made such a choice. After Duque suppressed the two dwarves' violent emotions, King Seraphar said, "Then, can we start today's competition?" Milhouse bowed slowly. Sorry, I was too impulsive just now. Now, please allow me to introduce today's competition, the champion teams from the Alliance and the Horde. Chapter 1661. Fighting. This would always be the main theme of the creatures. No world had unlimited resources. One day, they would find that there would never be too many places for them to live and reproduce. Limited resources and limitless reproduction requirements. This led to the inevitability of conflict. Why was the champion revered by everyone? It was because the victory of the champion was built on countless losers. Only by defeating the most and the strongest enemies could one bring the greatest sense of accomplishment. In front of Duque, King Seraphar, and the others were the two champion teams from the Alliance and the Horde. Milhouse's slightly shrill gnome voice sounded again. Come on. Warriors representing the Alliance and the Horde. On both sides of the special seats, two groups of people slowly walked out from the dark tunnel and onto the protruding platform at the side of the arena. Looking at these young and energetic faces, Duque couldn't help but smile. Back when he was still a newbie in Azeroth, he wasn't as good at fighting as these little guys. Duque suddenly noticed that both sides had 12 people. The Alliance had no Death Knights or Shamans, and the Horde had no Paladins. Duque was a little surprised, but then he felt relieved. Sure enough, this butterfly of his had stirred up the general trend of the world. Rothelma Theron was still at the level of a lackey, helping the lively Queen Sylvie. The Blood Elves didn't join the Horde, so naturally, the Horde didn't have any paladins. On the Alliance's side, even the Forgotten Ones were still a taboo, let alone the Immortals. Of course, they weren't so open-minded as to allow Death Knights to become official professionals. Similarly, for some reason, the Draenei didn't seem to have started their shamanic path. It felt a little messy. Duque didn't mind this. In Milhouse's introduction, Duque heard some unfamiliar names: Kavina Woodsong, Asilia Moonwalker, Ansa Forgemaster. Duque didn't have any impression of these little guys who were praised by Milhouse as the leaders of the new generation of the Alliance. After all, back in the game, Duque had beaten up the Horde warriors. Duque smiled. Heroes were created by the times. When the Dark Portal had just opened, it felt like anyone he met was a great person of the future. That era is gone forever. These little fellows might not be able to reach Jaina's level. However, every large organization was not simply composed of the strongest. The pyramid was the best representation of the ratio between the strong and the weak. Perhaps the ultimate victor would be decided by top-notch martial strength, but the true pillars of a large organization were the core members like the ones in front of them. Just as Milhouse finished his introduction, Duque stood up. He could clearly feel the excitement of this group of Alliance warriors. He cleared his throat, and his voice, which was clean and full of wisdom, was amplified by magic and spread to the entire audience. A true warrior must not only have the courage to face the most bleak and desperate situations, but he also needs a peaceful heart. In the future, perhaps some of you will become heroes of the Alliance. Perhaps some of you will die in battle. However, most of you will become the core members of the Alliance through your occupation. If the heroes in your eyes are the sharpness and shield of the Alliance, then the core members are the backbone of the Alliance. Only the backbone is the core that allows the Alliance to stand tall. I have high hopes for you, and I wish you all the best. I hope you can trust your comrades and completely integrate into the big family of the Alliance. Go! For the future of the Alliance, for the future of yourself and your friends, fight for it. Compared to Duque's calm speech, King Serafar's speech was much more passionate. He personally walked over to the tribal warriors and encouraged them face to face. Unfortunately, his speech was still so old-fashioned. It was nothing more than the honor of the tribe, the traditions of the orcs, blah blah blah, 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 and so on. Jaina came over and put her hand on the back of Duque's hand. She smiled and whispered, "Is it really okay to speak so unexciting?" Duque glanced at the tribal warriors who seemed to be on steroids and kept shouting. He snickered. If this was a one-on-one duel, I would undoubtedly lose by doing this. The second half of Duque's sentence was naturally that it was most appropriate for him to do so. Jaina was so smart that she understood on the spot. This Queen Kurtiras, who had always been a strong woman, showed a rare expression of a little girl. You're the most cunning. Sure enough, the following battle confirmed Duque's prediction. The tribal warriors on steroids were too fierce, so fierce that they forgot themselves and even easily gave up on the camp. Most of them just barely completed their own duties and focused more on attacking. It seemed that this was the so-called fierce as a tiger, but not a single enemy was killed. Almost all the Alliance warriors were injured from the start, but the Alliance quickly stabilized their position. The Alliance's battle strategy could be described in one sentence: focus fire on the shaman, desperately control the tree-shaped druid, constantly interrupt the priest's healing, and dispel all the tribe's continuous recovery and control skills. There were only 12 people, but the Alliance warriors fought like an army of 1,000. This scene moved King Serafar on the spot. His mouth moved for a moment before he squeezed out a few words. "We're going to lose." Lose? No way. Young Serafar was also a guy with the word brave carved on his chest, so he couldn't tell for a moment. Watch carefully and learn well. The gap between us and the Alliance is already comprehensive. Ah. Although surprised, young Serafar still followed his father's words and opened his eyes wide, trying to imprint this scene into his mind. Sure enough, after a few rounds, the tribe's recovery shaman was the first to fall under the concentrated firepower. The shaman's weakness of lacking life-saving skills was exposed at this moment. Then, as if there was a chain of explosions, under the rapid transfer of firepower and concentrated attacks of the Alliance warriors, the tribe's healers fell one by one. Like dominoes falling, the 12-man team of the tribe was wiped out in the next 10 seconds, all of them beaten to the ground. We won. The Alliance warrior, Sagakal, was the first to raise the weapon in his hand, showing off his victory to Duque, to the Alliance leaders, and to the audience of over 10,000. We won. The 11 Alliance warriors cheered in unison. Long live the Alliance! More than 6,000 Alliance people burst into cheers like a tsunami. On the contrary, the tribe side was silent. As the host of the ceremony, Milhouse immediately announced proudly, "All right. The team of warriors who will accept the Crusade's trial has been decided. They are the Alliance warriors." Chapter 1662. To Duque, it didn't matter who was the challenger. If the Alliance and the Horde were in a honeymoon period, Duque wouldn't even mind going easy on the Horde. But now, of course, if they could win, it was because of their abilities. Why didn't Duque give them his blessings? Good job. Reward. As a big shot in the alliance, Duque casually took out top-grade equipment from his storage space that had never been seen on the market. Duque would only give equipment that was as old as the molten core to outstanding newbie professionals. The equipment that Duque casually gave out was at least as good as the Alcafon's treasury. There were only so many people in the Alliance's hero squad, and equipment was quickly worn out. Plus, each boss wouldn't respawn after being killed in one go, so the loot was 10 to 8 times more than in the game. It was easy for the hero squad to get more equipment. After Duque became a demigod, there were many additional benefits. As a former Void Lord and a demigod who had mastered the power of the soul, he could now erase the soul binding on equipment taken off by mortals. This was very simple: erase the soul imprint on the equipment. As long as it wasn't an artifact with basic or above self-awareness, there was no equipment that could withstand Duque's soul attack after it left its owner. This allowed the Alliance experts to use their equipment much more efficiently. Looking at the treatment of the local tycoons on the Alliance's side, looking at the happy warriors of the Alliance, almost all the tribal professionals were envious and had a pitiful look on their faces. The most painful thing was that when the arena was first built, all the Alliance and Horde soldiers were forced to not leave the arena early, regardless of whether they won or lost. The Alliance warriors were celebrating, and the Horde, which was mainly made up of orcs, felt very aggrieved. At that moment, King Seraphar stood up and jumped into the field from the side of the 5-meter-high stand. He pulled the dizzy orc warrior, Nahok Steelbreaker, to his feet. Stand up. All of you stand up. You always claim to be the inheritors of the orc tradition. So what's your attitude toward the victors now? King Seraphar pointed at the thousands of orc hostages and asked, "Is this the attitude of a victor?" "But, they're not orcs." Someone in the crowd said weakly. Old Salyafar waved his hand. What a joke. He pointed at the crowd of twin-headed ogres and said, "Do you see those ogres? Once upon a time, our ancestors were proud of killing an ogre alone, and they were heroes who killed Goron alone. But today, they are in the Horde's army, fighting side by side with us orcs like our brothers. Isn't it because we worship the strong? Why can we even accept our former mortal enemies?" King Salyafar turned around and pointed at the Alliance warriors who were looking at the orcs. "Since you call yourselves brave orcs, then tell me, did these warriors cheat in the battle just now?" The thousands of orcs fell silent. The king suddenly roared like a drum, "Orcs! Answer me right now." As if awakened from a dream, the thousands of orcs stood up in unison and answered, "No, no." It was another question that seemed to wake the world up. So their victory, was it a glorious victory? The thousands of orcs answered in unison again, yes. Using all the strength in his body, he practically roared out every drop of air in his lungs. At that moment, it was as if he was possessed by Lord Roar. His voice was like thunder. Then all of you should *King applaud and cheer for the winner. Otherwise, you're not fit to call yourselves warlike orcs. After being stunned for a full 2 seconds, the orcs burst into cheers that could topple mountains and overturn seas. Yes. The victors should be praised. Well fought. Your battle tactics are amazing. When I go back, I'm going to practice my little bastard's battle tactics. The Alliance audience was stunned for half a second, then followed suit and shouted like a storm. Huh. That's more like it. If you want to fight alongside us, you have to be strong. Amidst the cheers, the orc warriors walked towards the Alliance warriors. Nahok lightly punched the chest armor of the Alliance warrior, Sakagar. "Brother, you fought beautifully just now. You're the real main tank that supports the team. Your whirlwind was beautiful too." Sakagar smiled back. Unknowingly, the atmosphere between the Alliance and the Horde began to harmonize. At that moment, Duque stood up and waved his arms. His voice, which contained faint divine power, spread in all directions. I, Duke Marcus, hereby propose that since the Alliance and the Horde will be facing the Lich King's terrifying undead army in the upcoming Battle of Icecrown Glacier, for the future of all the living, the warriors of the Alliance and the Horde should form a team and participate in this crusade together. Varrock, what do you think? Of course, King Salyafar agreed. Great. That's what an ally should do. Duque waved his hand, and dozens of noble purple objects flew towards the Horde warriors under the support of a strange small tornado. This is... The orc warrior Nahok was a little stunned. Duque's voice rang out again. The winner should enjoy cheers, praises, and the best prize. But the one who put in the effort, blood, and sweat should also be praised. This is a slightly lower level prize. Let's take it as the prize for the runner-up. If one wanted to form a team, if half the team's equipment was more than one level lower, it would be impossible to carry them. If the loser was given the same prize as the winner, then the wine of victory would be bitter. Duque's move not only satisfied the winner's heart of glory, but also made it so that the loser would not be left with nothing. The gap was too big to form a team. Even Varrock could not help but clap his hands in praise. Beautiful. Millhouse's shrill voice rang out again. Well then, warriors of the Alliance and the Horde, please enter the arena together and face the greatest terrifying creature from No Scent. Almost at the same time, a roar that seemed to have come from the primordial wilderness resounded throughout the entire arena. Roar. At the same time, the huge iron gate in the south opened, and a huge horse-like creature that had broken free from its shackles charged out. At first glance, he looked like an oversized centaur. If one looked carefully, they would find that he was more than 4 stories tall, with ash-black fur and brown skin. There were 2 huge tusks on his cheeks that looked like curved ivory tusks. That's right. He is the dangerous creature from the Arctic, the Mammoth Man, Gamok the Impaler. Chapter 1663. The Mammoth Men were a fierce creature that lived in Northrend. In a sense, they were like the Lords of the Abyss, except that their lower bodies were not as fat. The Mammoth Men were savage by nature. Once they gathered together, they would inevitably kill each other. This was also the main reason why they were not a big threat. As a very challenging gladiator, the Mammoth Men were not bad. Wow, which hunter is strong enough to capture this guy? Duque asked casually. Jaina, who was next to him, giggled. Huh? Something was wrong? Hey! Jaina, confess now, or you will be punished. Duque threatened. Jaina betrayed her best friend. It's the Windrunner sisters. Duque's face darkened. There were 4 Windrunner sisters, and the 4th, Lilith, did not have the ability to capture a monster like Gamok the Impaler. As the second sister, Queen Sylvia would basically be drowned by the sea of documents that Lord Thema handed over if she did not participate in high-intensity hero battles. With her strong sense of responsibility, she would never abandon her people and run off to hunt. Then the rest, since they were sisters, F***ck. Duque could not stay calm anymore. He opened the portal angrily and ran off to interrogate them. A few minutes later, just as Jaina was getting impatient and was about to open Karazhan's magician's eye to to inspect the situation, Duque, who was completely gloomy, came back. Yo, my invincible man, why do you look like you lost a battle? Ugh, I lost my eloquence. That's right, it was Aurelia and Winrisa who had come out to hunt. When Duque asked them why they did not take care of the baby and instead came out to hunt with their big bellies, the Windrunner sisters argued. Duque, you big liar. You clearly don't want the baby to come out earlier. Look at how many years we've been pregnant. Taking care of the baby? It's so stuffy. What's the meaning of keeping our bodies so ugly for so long? Danger? It's not dangerous at all. It's not like we're going to fight against an elemental lord or an ancient god. A few beasts that aren't even demigods can't stop us sisters. We also have Sister Lilith as our bodyguard. Let me tell you, after you defeat Arthas, hurry up and transfer your magic power over, or else you'll be waiting for 1 corpse and 2 lives. Oh, it should be 2 corpses and 4 lives. After being bombarded by the 2 sisters like a machine gun, a certain Du was defeated. Have you been discovered? Jaina teased Duque. Actually, he had discovered it long ago. It's just that they love me and don't want me to be distracted, so they didn't expose me. That's right, Duque didn't give enough mana to Aurelia and Sasha's child on purpose. This allowed him and the Windrunner sisters' children to grow up peacefully. In fact, if the magic power was abnormally abundant, the child might have already been born and could be used as soy sauce. It was precisely because there were too many uncertain fates that caused Duque to be hesitant. He completely couldn't dissuade them, so he allowed them to conceive first. Sigh, what kind of existence is a descendant to me? Duque sighed. The social environment was bad, and the birth rate was low. This was almost a sociological conclusion. Really, you were the one who encouraged birth in the Alliance. You even created a Valentine's Day back then, humph. You even wasted my expression. Faced with Jaina's ridicule, Duque was powerless to retaliate. In the arena below, the mammoth man boss Gamak, who only had 1 attack mode, had already been defeated. Immediately after was Photophobia and Sourthroat. These were 2 large worms without eyes. They had a pair of bull horns on their heads, and on both sides were neatly curved sharp horns. They were like centipedes, but centipedes had legs that could move, while Photophobia had spikes. Their backs were full of porcupines. Simply put, one was a fire worm, while the other was a poisonous worm. Their appearance caused quite a bit of chaos among the allied warriors, but it was only to the extent of creating chaos. After killing the 2 worms, the 3rd giant monster, Ice Roar, appeared. This was a giant northern gorilla with a pair of curved goat horns on its head, blue skin, and white fur all over its body. Although it had extraordinary brute force and could also turn people into popsicles within the range of the cone, its strength was completely insufficient in front of the warriors who were gradually working together. Soon, Ice Roar was also killed. Victory! Let's cheer for our warriors. Milhouse stirred up the emotions of the audience very well. After all, this was a warrior group formed by the Alliance and the Horde. It was always easy to make people's blood boil when they saw a powerful creature that was larger than themselves. Thunderous cheers rang out incessantly. After a short break, the 2nd round of the trial began. When a short dwarf mage stepped into the middle of the arena, Duque immediately recognized that this was one of the 2 dwarves who wanted to fight with Brainless Roar. Hello everyone, I am the Radiant Moon Dwarf Warlock Wilfred. Now, I will conduct a slightly more dangerous summoning ceremony. What is about to be summoned will be a powerful elite demon. I cannot be sure how ferocious this demon will be. Everyone, please be careful. Wilfred's words caused the members of the warrior group to break out in cold sweat and clench the weapons in their hands. Only Duque, who was sitting on the high platform, revealed a thought-provoking expression. What's wrong? Jaina asked. Nothing, I just thought of something. In the original space and time, this next battle would be the product of an accident. Wilfred intended to summon an ordinary demon to fight against the players, but he accidentally summoned King Galaxus, the mid-tier Void Lord of the Eridar race, and was killed by his own summoned creature. At that time, the player's mission was to subdue this demon leader who had intruded. However, in this life, Duque chuckled. Duque really wanted to see, with him here, which demon lord would dare to touch the tigers, but when the 3 leaders of the Burning Legion were temporarily dead. Dumuk even secretly hid all of his energy waves, hiding his divine body in the void crack, leaving only a mirror image of truth, that was exactly the same as his real body. Under Wilfred's spell, 6 red demonic claws appeared out of thin air. At first, they were hexagonal and tore open a hexagonal portal that looked like a Coke bottle. It was narrow at the top and wide in the middle. The portal used for summoning was huge. The foul stench of evil energy that came from the portal could be felt from 10 miles away. However, 10 seconds passed, 1 minute passed, and not a single ghost came out. Chapter 1664. Ha ha ha. My dear master, a superior demon may be arrogant, but it depends on who he's talking to. Planet Azeroth has become a taboo topic among the Void Lords. Unless it's safe, anyone with a brain won't be stupid enough to come here. Duque felt a slight pain in his balls when he heard the seductive voice in his soul connection. A second female voice sounded from the soul link. Although the style was similar, this voice had a more imperial air. My master, the weave you've set up in this area is too high level. Any high-ranked demon would be able to sense such a surging mana reaction. Who doesn't know that the one who killed the 3 leaders of the Burning Legion is the demigod of the weave, Duke Marcus? That's right, the one speaking to Duque was naturally the 2 high-ranking female demon sisters who had betrayed the Burning Legion, the Eridar twins. The high-ranking warlock Aless was still hiding in the tribe, while Queen Sailoras had been assigned the task of guarding against the plague by Duque. She had secretly followed Duque to Northrend and hid near the arena. On the scene, a funny scene happened. It seemed that the Burning Legion's morale would be weakened if they didn't send some cannon fodder after such a large portal. So, the Legion sent a demon. It was a rather large Doombringer. It looked majestic and imposing. As soon as it appeared, it gave the allied warriors a show of strength. It directly threw a group shadow arrow. The point was that this guy was kicked here. Under the scan of Duque's system elf, he could clearly see that King Galaxus' left leg had kicked the Doomguard Gazurika's butt. On the other hand, Mr. Gazurika was AF * King Rare Elite. He wasn't even a Void Lord. He was a complete tragedy. The portal closed, and Duque wasn't interested in taking another look. If the allied warriors couldn't even deal with this guy, then Duque would definitely punish them by making them swim in a cesspit. Jaina was already laughing so hard that her stomach hurt. Alright, I'll go back and warn Wilfred. If it weren't for us, he would have been killed by his own summoned creature. Yes, Duque replied casually before asking Salolas in his soul, how's the situation on your side? Master's intelligence is indeed impressive. That guy just came ashore from the south side of the Dragonbone Waste. He's using the tribe's dock, and his team has more than 100 barrels of unknown substances. Duque ordered, continue to monitor them, and see if there are any places along the way that are suitable to make a move. Sailoras was rather surprised. Aren't you going to catch a big fish? For example, the Sun King. Duque's voice turned cold. Remember your identities. I only need you to do things and report to me. Everything else is superfluous. Almost at the same time, 2 waves of soul punishment traveled through the void and reached the Eridar twins. On 2 different continents, Gemini simultaneously curled up into a ball like a shrimp in pain. Master, spare me. We've overstepped our boundaries. Duque would not be nice to these demon sisters who were good at currying favor. The Gemini were not the kind of people who would open a dye shop just because he showed them some respect. They would constantly take the opportunity to test Duque's reaction and bottom line, walking the line between profit and taboo. Perhaps under the pressure of the Burning Legion, they would not really want to rebel, but they had been doing this for at least 20,000 years. This kind of habit had long been ingrained in their bones and souls. If he did not teach them a lesson, they would take over at any moment. As Duque dealt with the Eridar twins, the battle below had already ended without any suspense. This is the so-called Crusade trial? Isn't it too light? Are there no more exciting opponents? Below, the orc warrior Nahok spread his arms and let out a heroic voice. When the nearby audience heard this, they also joined in the uproar. After all, a seemingly mediocre demon would not be able to excite the audience. Wilfred was dumbfounded. He did not know that he had already walked through the gates of hell. I'm working according to Milhouse's ideas. Why are you booing me? The silly Pharaoh Milhouse also looked a little embarrassed. He ran over to Duque and asked, "This, Lord Commander, should I get someone to summon a stronger demon?" Beside him, Jaina chuckled. It would be fine if he was not here. He is the man who killed Archimonde and killed Jaden with his own hands. The demons would have to be out of their minds to send a lord over. Only then did the two dwarves look like they had a sudden realization. Beside them, Varrock was stunned and then immediately smiled bitterly. A hero to oneself, an enemy to the enemy. Duque could be considered to have a different kind of fierce reputation. Next wave, Duque ordered. Milhouse's voice quickly echoed in the arena. Next, the third wave of the test is coming. This time, it is a real test. Not only combat power, but also the ability to make decisions on the spot. This pair of strange evil spirits easily killed 3 high-level holy knights and annihilated an entire platoon of soldiers. In the end, one of the great 5 silver sages, Gavin Rad, and the chief Drenii holy knight, Maralad, worked together to capture them. They represent the strange power of the Lich King, they represent the extreme of evil, warriors of the allied army. Are you ready to face the unknown challenge? It had to be said that this silly dwarf was quite provocative when it came to speeches. Of course, this was on the premise that his sharp voice could easily cause people to lose their composure. Come! The Alliance warrior, Sakajar, and the Horde warrior, Nahok, both shouted in unison. The two lightly knocked their weapons against each other, indicating that the two had long since put aside their previous enmity. At least in this trial, they were prepared to cooperate sincerely. Just as Milhouse was about to announce the start of the battle, Duque suddenly said, "Milhouse, you go down and join the battle too." Huh? Duque's order was amplified by magic. Naturally, everyone was surprised. Even the Master of Ceremonies wanted to participate. What was going on? "Sir Commander, isn't this trial meant to test the new powerhouses? I'm just a dwarf with a better tongue." With that, Milhouse even showed off his Morning Star Wizard badge. Duque did not say anything. He did not know what this silly dwarf was planning, but this did not stop him from casting a spell. Magician's Foot, to put it bluntly, this small spell is just a trick similar to the magician's hand. It gathers arcane energy in midair and forms the shape of a large foot. Milhouse let out a strange cry and immediately used Flash, trying to escape the attack range of this foot. Chapter 1665. However, if he could escape, Duque would write his name backwards. The mage's foot was like a maggot in a bone, accurately kicking the dwarf's butt and sending him into the arena. Ouch! The dwarf let out an exaggerated scream, then got up from the ground, holding his waist. My old bones! Even if you're the commander of the Alliance, you can't beat an old man like this, can you? Milhouse was trying to gain sympathy. Duque laughed. Pretentious. Keep pretending. I really can't see that you're deliberately suppressing your strength to avoid being given a real position in the Alliance and being trapped in the military so that you can't take risks. Even your white beard is dyed. Get out of here, or I'll teach you a lesson. Duque exposed Milhouse's secret. No matter how thick-skinned the silly dwarf was, he could not help but blush. Avoiding military service could be a big or small matter. With the current shortage of mages, in principle, all Dalajan mages held positions in the military. Once war broke out, they would be conscripted to the front lines according to the priority of their positions. Generally speaking, other than the Daligen administrators, specialized magic researchers, and the professors and lecturers of the magic academies, no one was an exception. Radiant Moon mages were not cabbages. Even now, the personal guards of many kings or leaders were only at the Radiant Moon level. A Radiant Moon pharaoh like Milhouse would at least be a brigadier general in the Alliance military. Now, this weird midget had a bitter look on his face. His expression was no different from that of a wronged wife. Unfortunately, after everyone knew that this guy was hiding his strength, no one pitied him. On the big magic screen, everyone saw his funny look and burst into laughter. It had to be said that this dwarf had some ideas. This madman had actually connected his ice and fire elemental magic circuits, using the principle of ice and fire to counteract each other. Originally, by doing this, even if he didn't blow up his own magic circuit, he would still be able to create a compound spell like Frostfire Arrow. However, this guy had perfected the magic power conversion. Using his more powerful arcane circuit, he transferred the ice and fire elements back into the magic gem. That's right. By constantly releasing his own magic power, he was forcefully suppressing his own magic waves. If Duze was not a transmigrator and knew that Milhouse Mana Storm was not a weakling, he would not have used his demigod elemental sense to sense the flow of magic in his body. Otherwise, he would have been fooled and thought that this dwarf was just a sky mage. The funny thing was that this guy didn't give up and continued to hide. His elemental undulations rippled out, and everyone could sense the increase in his mana. However, it was only at the peak of the Morning Star realm. Of course, as a member of this warrior team, he was definitely of an outstanding standard. Since it was an order from the Supreme Commander, no one minded. Just focus on attacking the enemy. You don't have to control the battlefield. After all, we haven't worked together before. Alliance's captain, Shah Gar, arranged. All right. In any case, mages didn't cause any trouble and were pure damage output. They were a large cannon. On the other side, another dwarf, Wilfred, took over the role of the Master of Ceremonies. He announced loudly, "All right. The brave warriors of the Allied forces are about to face the next wave of tests. They are the terrifying undead sisters, the Wagri twins." On the battlefield, one black and one white, two undead in the form of angels wearing black and white armor appeared. Milhouse had started to cause trouble. "Wait, I need to make some preparations. You guys go first, I'll make some water." With that, he hid at the back of the team and began to cast water-making spells and food-making spells. He didn't care that his voice was amplified by magic and could be heard by everyone present. Shah Gar's eyes widened. Damn, is this a lazy person with a lot of *T and P? Or does he specialize in causing trouble? But the enemy had already appeared. As the main tank, Shah Gar could only ignore this crazy dwarf and rush forward to take on the black enemy, the darkness evil messenger Edith. On the other side, the orc warrior Nahok took on the light evil messenger Fiora. On the other side, Milhouse didn't care whether the battle in front of him was earth-shattering or bloody. He didn't care what the hell those strange pure white or pure black light balls were. He continued to talk to himself like a lunatic. Great, next, I need some protective spells. This guy stood up and cast Ice Barrier and Magic Shield on himself. Just when the audience of more than 10,000 thought that this dwarf, who had been taken care of by Duque, was about to start fighting, he sat down again. Of course, I need to replenish my mana first. You guys will see my power. Just wait a little longer. With that, he sat down to drink water to recover his mana and eat bread to recover his health. F***CK. This works too? The audience's eyeballs almost popped out of their sockets. Only Duke could see through the System Elf's elemental analyzer that this genius gnome was actually adjusting his own magic circuits at lightning speed, straightening out the previously messed up magic circuits and reconnecting them once again. Gianna, do you see it? I see it. Gianna smiled like a flower. This clever Queen Kurtiras was probably already thinking about how to abduct Milhouse to her side. On the other side, the allied warriors in the fierce battle ahead had gradually found their way and discovered the secret of the Wagri twins. We can't let these two stay together. If they are of the same color, their damage to me and vice versa will be reduced. If they are of the opposite color, their damage will be increased. What kind of move is this? Damn it! They've replied. In order to fully achieve the effect of the trial, other than the two gods who had captured the Wagri twins, the information of the enemy was completely confidential to the trial takers. This was the only way to achieve the effect of the trial. After all, on the battlefield, when encountering an unknown enemy, there would not be so many transmigrators to give you spoilers. When facing an enemy that could not be taken down in a short period of time, how to see through the characteristics of the enemy's attacks and how to find the enemy's weakness was a problem that every professional had to consider. In the professional training classes, as well as in the military schools that specialized in training alliance commanders, there were professionals who taught newbies how to think and how to find their own way to defeat the enemy. Duque was very satisfied to see that this temporarily formed team of warriors had quickly stabilized their footing after the initial panic and confusion. The healers worked hard to restore the team's health, and the damage dealers began to carefully look for the enemy's weakness, although from Duque's point of view, the team's situation was a little bad because of the high consumption of magic power. It was precisely because he considered this possibility that Duque kicked the damned dwarf mage into the field. As expected, the sharp dwarf voice sounded again. Okay, I'm ready. So, which idiot is ready to get a good beating now? Chapter 1666. The dwarf was irascible. Those who provoked Pharaoh would be in danger. According to the needs of the plot, only important characters would have their own background music. However, what made Duque not know whether to laugh or cry was that when he saw the majestic Milhouse, whose body was surging with elements that attracted attention like a spotlight, the first thing that came to Duque's mind was actually the melody of The Return of the King. What a joke! So even a lunatic could have a moment of brilliance? One could say that Milhouse was unreliable, and one could use all kinds of reasons to attack him, but this guy really had a brain. When the light evil messenger Fiora opened her shield and was about to cast twin coordination, to recover her and the dark evil messenger's soul power, vitality, Milhouse made a small jump and separated his left and right hands, one in front and one behind, as if he was stretching them. In the next second, the frost elements that were so strong that they definitely exceeded the level of the current warrior group suddenly exploded on his body, forming a small tornado. A white frost arrow broke through the chaotic atmosphere and headed straight for Fiora's face. Pa! The powerful magic attack not only destroyed Fiora's shield, but the aftermath of the magic attack also directly hit Fiora's face, causing her to have a short pause in her spellcasting. Once again, Milhouse was the first to react. He directly flashed to close the distance between them, and his freed right hand directly went up to cast an anti-magic spell. The deliberately condensed chaotic magic dispelled the twin coordination that was about to be completed. The Waglio twins' attempt to recover was directly interrupted. When people of the same color stand together, there seems to be a bonus. The healer is of the same color, and the attacker is of a different color. Duque did not expect that Milhouse would actually be able to hold the entire scene in one go. This scene really surprised Duque. The potential that was displayed did not necessarily mean that it would be realized as strength. Under the combined effect of a series of internal and external factors such as hard work, mentality, willpower, and opportunities, the potential would grow into strength. Although the group of Alliance and Horde warriors present seemed to be very powerful, as if all of them could grow to the level of the 5 Silver Saints or Sal, unfortunately, as far as Duque knew, in the original history, no one here could grow to that level. Even Milhouse, who was still active until the end of Return of the Legion, was just a follower, not a big shot in the justice camp. However, since Duque could change so many people's fates, he wouldn't look at the people around him the same way he used to. It seemed that the shackles of history had been broken by Duque's arrival. Just look, in history, the Van Cleef father and daughter duo were just unranked bosses, but now they were the top 2 thieves in the alliance. Sylvanas, who should have died and become the Forgotten Queen, not only lived well, but also became a demigod. Onyxia, Vashj, and the other villains who should have left the scene had all become Duque's subordinates. Duque would not be too surprised if someone like Milhouse grew to become a heaven-defying monster. He was a demigod and the highest commander of the alliance. Sitting in this position, he naturally had to act like a high-ranking person. He would not participate in a trial of this level. He was like a real god, sitting above the clouds and quietly watching the efforts and struggles of mortals. Only existences at the same level of demigod or above were worthy of Duque taking action. For example, suddenly, there was an abnormal roar coming from the ground. Immediately, a violent shock spread to every corner of the arena. The ground of the arena where the Wagri twins were fighting fiercely, collapsed. What the hell? What happened? Save, all the Alliance warriors, together with the Wagri twins, along with thousands of tons of large and small gravel, fell into a seemingly bottomless pit. Duque suddenly stood up and shouted angrily, "How dare you!" Of course, he knew that the final boss of the Crusader trial was the great Beetle King, Anub'alak. This former king of the Spider Kingdom, Izhenirab, had become one of the most powerful minions of the Scourge army after being killed and enslaved by Arthas. However, under normal circumstances, he would wait until the trial taker defeated the Wagri twins before taking action. Now, he obviously wanted to disrupt this step. No. Perhaps it could be said that this ability to seize the opportunity to launch a fatal blow was quite admirable. However, you little worm, do you really think that I don't exist? Duque was furious. With just a thought, Duque's subordinate, the wind elemental envoy Thaddeus, appeared from the magic net. Thaddeus, who was wearing a full set of armor, waved his semi-illusory arm and summoned small tornadoes that enveloped every warrior. The divine emissary Alonsis Fail's illusory image also appeared. He waved his staff and opened an incomparably huge, holy word, shield, using holy light to form a barrier between the arena and the stands, preventing the flying gravel from hitting the audience. At the same time, the frost emissary Sapphiron's illusory image charged out of the magic net. It followed the deep black hole and charged towards the bottom of the cave at a speed faster than a freefall. It could completely feel the anger of its master, Duque. It wanted to teach the undead bug king who dared to appear early a lesson. Just as an intense frost dragon breath was brewing in Sapphiron's chest, an even larger skeletal dragon claw suddenly broke through the vertical wall of the cave and grabbed Sapphiron's neck. Roar! Sapphiron struggled instinctively, but a huge skeletal dragon head that was at least twice its size leapt out of the deep black hole and bit its vitals. Sapphiron immediately let out a mournful cry, and then its body started to dissipate. Sapphiron was already dead. In essence, it was a spectral dragon, but because it had elementalized, it had gained a physical body. Ordinary physical attacks could not hurt it at all. However, at this moment, everyone in the magic net, including Duque, could feel the pain in Sapphiron's soul. Not only was this mysterious opponent stronger than Sapphiron, he had even managed to injure it on a spiritual level. The part of the magic net system that Sapphiron was in charge of almost went out of control, forcing the demon emperor Vek, Lor and Khadgar, the manager of the magic net, to rush to the rescue. Who is it? This time, even Duque's expression changed. Supported by a gust of wind, Duque hovered above the huge hole and looked down. He saw a dragon head that emitted a blue glow. It had dull scales and withered dragon skin that seemed to be stuck to its bones, as well as a pair of eyes that were filled with the light of the netherworld. Duque's pupils constricted to the size of a pin. His facial muscles twitched, and his voice was bone-chilling. Amidst the chattering of his teeth, Duque finally said the opponent's name, Ma Li. Go. See. Chapter 1667. Maligos suddenly laughed out loud. Ha ha ha. Destroy me? Don't make me laugh. You despicable person, didn't you take advantage of my mental weakness to seize control of the elements? Now I'm not crazy. I just want to ask, how can you beat me? The strong elemental fluctuations shook the entire atmosphere in the arena. Even after Maligos died and became a Dracolic, this characteristic did not weaken. Seizing control of the elements was a test of a pharaoh's basic skills. Although it was basic skills, it tested many things: elemental affinity, understanding of the habits and structure of the elements, the level of instilling the will into the elements. It did not make sense at all. Logically speaking, if one wanted to attack the Wormrus Temple or launch a surprise attack elsewhere, one should have gathered all the superior forces. For a demigod like Duque, who had powerful teleportation abilities, the feint meant almost nothing. In the eyes of the other pharaoh, Duque's control of the frost elements around him was snatched away almost immediately, and he looked miserable. Huh? What are they doing? Humiliating? Perhaps. But as long as I destroy you, I will regain my dignity. Getting angry with a lunatic would only make one as tasteless as a lunatic. Duque would not do such a thing. Unknowingly, the huge pit in the arena actually showed signs of being sealed up again. Not far away, Saliafar and Big Saliafar had already pulled out their weapons, but they were a little embarrassed. Although Maligos, who was now a Dracolic, was below the hole along the edge of the arena, they only had one chance to jump down. If they missed it, they would fall into the bottomless hole below. Duque scolded, "Thief! A dragon aspect who betrayed the Pantheon, abandoned his duty, and threw himself into the arms of the undead, and you have the nerve to say that the Titan rune is his? Stop making me laugh, okay?" Whether it was in the original history or in the game, Arthas was just a nest, hiding in the Icecrown Fortress and waiting to be overthrown. The cold wind that seemed to blow forever stopped, and in its place was a turbulent flow of elements that seemed to be in a somewhat violent state. Right now, the situation of king against king and general against general could only be considered as restraining each other. Alexstrasza. Maligos has become a Dracolic. He's here with me. Duque narrowed his eyes and secretly sent a magic message to the crowd to evacuate the arena. Pa! 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 The huge icicles were continuously shattered, and then turned into ice shards, accumulating at the entrance of the pit. The physiological structure of the human body was not naturally formed for magic. However, Maligos gave Duque this feeling. It was as if every cell in his body, as well as his soul, could be filled with elements and cause the elements to resonate. The question was, what was Arthas trying to do? Duque was too lazy to continue. He spread his hands and said, "Sigh. Arguing with a psychopath, I only did it because I suddenly had a brain cramp. All right. Maligos, since you dare to appear in front of me as an undead, are you ready to be destroyed by me forever? You didn't expect it to be me, did you? Despicable thief." Duke Marcus, in the huge pit, Maligos raised his head high and stared at Duque in the air with eyes that were like hellfire. Like a spider web, the veins of the magic net crisscrossed in the air behind Duque. Different magic net channels emitted different colors of light. Both sides knew that they were both demigods. Whether it was the Red Dragon Queen's side or Duque's side, they could not do anything to each other in a short period of time. Once the battle dragged on, it would turn into a decisive battle. Although this was the periphery of the Icecrown Glacier, it was not as effective as the Icecrown Fortress. Hundreds of hands of magic appeared in midair and enveloped the dark pit in a hemispherical shape. Arcane missiles the size of water tanks formed a heavy rain that poured into the pit. The real battle was between Duque and Malygos. F***ck. As expected of a veteran demigod, Duque could not help but curse. Dozens of sharp icicles the size of pillars shot into the sky like rockets, shooting at Duque in the air. Of course, the second fool was not a weak lowly. At least, she would not cause trouble everywhere like she was now. Duque had the system genie. With more than 1,000 threads, he could independently inject different willpower to snatch frost elements. However, in terms of elemental affinity, Duque naturally lost. Duque was called a thief because he had taken the Titan rune that originally belonged to Malygos. However, Duque did not feel guilty at all. The ports of the 4 elemental realms suddenly enlarged so that more elements could enter the magic net. It could not be helped. Beastmen could not fly. The magic net that should not have been visible to the naked eye became visible due to the extremely exaggerated elemental charge. Betrayal? I am clearly the master of all magic and elements in Azeroth. You damn thief, you took advantage of my moment of inattention to steal the secrets of magic and create the magic net that blasphemes the magic elements of this world. The real traitor is you. Malygos roared angrily. Compared to Malygos, Duque was more like a mountain king in the frost elemental realm, while the former blue dragon king was a natural king, the master of the entire frost elemental realm. Pursing his lips, Duque waved his hands quickly. Combined with the incantations in his spiritual sea, Duque began his counterattack. Bastard. You. Duque suddenly realized something and became furious. Just as Duque saw Malygos, who was either an undead dragon or a Dracolic, appear, he received an urgent message from Alexstrasza. Duque, come over immediately. Arthas has appeared. He's standing on the inner side of the Gate of Divine Wrath, confronting me. The butterfly effect was interesting at times, but it was also a pain in the ass at other times. Almost as soon as the spectral Dragon King finished speaking, Duque suddenly felt that he had lost control of the frost elemental realm in this area. The only one who could help Duque was Jaina. She summoned an ice pedestal and supported herself in mid-air. However, this pedestal was not safe, as it could be smashed by Malygos at any time. Ha ha ha. You claim to be a demigod of the magic net, how can you allow your control of the frost elemental realm to be stolen? Don't you feel ashamed? Malygos laughed maniacally as he waved his skinless, almost bony front claws. Chapter 1668. Hee hee. Have you finally realized it? It's too late, Duke Marcus. Malygos' voice came from below. That's right. You're so happy to have troops stationed at the edge of our territory. Killing a bunch of new heroes from the Alliance army should be enough to make you feel a little heartache. As soon as Malygos' voice fell, all the high-ranking officers of the Alliance army, including Duque, felt a toothache. What an uproar. Duque couldn't accuse Malygos of being a demigod for being so shameless. What the former Blue Dragon King was doing was the same as what Duque wanted to do after spring, weakening the enemy's war potential. Malygos was only here to restrain Duque. The huge and thick layer of ice cut off the connection between the cave and the outside world. The frost element that Malygos had absolute dominance there even rejected the entry of arcane elements, not to mention opening the portal. Even if Duque wanted to save them, he couldn't save Nahok and the others. Almost at the same time, cries for help sounded everywhere in Duque's magic communication network. The entire Alliance army surrounding the Icecrown Glacier area had reports of being attacked by the Calamity army. Most of them were ambushed by gargoyles known as Fortress Watchers. These dark magic creatures with the ability to fly at high speed used the blizzard as cover to directly cross the defensive airspace of the front line and attack the Alliance army on the second line. Not only that, Countless ice bridges extended down from the cliffs of the ice-crowned glacier area, forming grooves that looked like slides. The stitched abominations, which were sewn from more than 10 corpses, flew along these ice slides directly to the various Alliance army positions. The fat abominations were directly thrown over in the form of an air raid, forcing the Alliance army to fight in close combat. Just this alone made Arthas's surprise attack a great success. Counterattack. Counterattack. Push the enemy back. Even though the Alliance army commanders were shouting at the top of their lungs. In the harsh snowstorm that Arthas had deliberately condensed and made it impossible to see anything 5 meters away, it was completely extravagant to form a formation. Fortunately, the communication system of the Alliance was supported by the weave and had not been destroyed. Otherwise, the situation would have been even worse. Even so, they were forced to fight in close combat. It was conceivable that the Allied forces would suffer heavy losses this time. Even though his face was ashen, Duque still managed to squeeze the words out of his mouth through gritted teeth. Arthas, well done. The Alliance camp was filled with fear and panic. We can't hold on any longer. An Alliance soldier shouted. The Alliance commanders shouted at the top of their lungs in the howling wind, retreat. Retreat. No. We're not leaving. For the glory of the Alliance. The leader of the recruits had just finished speaking when he was slapped by his commanding officer. Idiot. If they all died here, they would all become immortals, which in turn would increase the burden of the Alliance in the future. Harming his own comrade. Let's go. All of you, go. Don't hold up the rear. Run as many as you can. The second lieutenant of the Alliance fiercely ordered. Then, what about you, sir? The recruit was a little confused. Someone has to collect the bodies of our brothers. Collect the corpse. Cut the crap. All of you, get lost. Don't be a hindrance here. The second lieutenant of the Alliance kicked the recruits' butt and chased them away while cursing and beating them. As he watched the recruits disappear into the wind and snow behind him, the second lieutenant of the Alliance lit a cigarette with a windproof lighter. Unfortunately, it was extinguished after just a bit. Sigh, brothers. In front of his eyes, many swaying figures appeared. Every single one of them wore shining silver armor with a blue background and golden edges of a lion's head pattern. It was just that eye-catching. However, these faces that were incomparably familiar all became incomparably sinister. Some of them were missing half a face, some of them had their heads hung because half of their throats had been bitten off, and there were even more who didn't have complete limbs. They could only drag their broken upper bodies as they crawled on the ground, leaving behind long and shocking bloody traces. In front of the magic communication device, the second lieutenant of the Alliance picked up the microphone. Hello. Front line, position N567, Second Lieutenant John Ganner calling for Mountain Eagle. Mountain Eagle is here. N567, please speak. The image of a female Alliance soldier's head lit up in the magic mirror. Position N567 has already fallen. I had the last group of soldiers withdraw. I am already the last living person in this position. If you don't want this place to become a paradise for the undead, please fire at me as soon as possible. The female Alliance soldier stared blankly for a long time before replying with a trembling voice, Mountain Eagle understands. Second Lieutenant Ganner, do you have any last words? Long live the Alliance. After lightly saying these words, the second lieutenant of the Alliance, who wasn't much older than the recruits, was torn apart by his former comrade and dragged backwards. From start to finish, the female soldier saw that on the face of the second lieutenant of the Alliance, until the very last moment, there was still a faint smile. 3 minutes later, a fierce rumbling sound rang out from the artillery position behind position N567. The berserk artillery fire instantly drowned out the entire position, breaking down all of the humanoid figures in the entire position into components. At this moment, Duque's heart was like a raging storm, rising and falling uncontrollably. It had been a long, long time since the Alliance had suffered such a loss. Relying on their memories of history, the Alliance's campaigns had always been successful. Compared to the results of the battle, their losses were almost negligible. This made Duque, and even the entire Alliance, involuntarily enter a state of almost blind optimism. Today, Arthas had taught them a good lesson. Duque didn't know how many soldiers they would lose in this surprise attack, but it was definitely more than 10,000. This was the largest single battle loss since Duke became the Alliance's commander-in-chief. It wasn't to the extent of hurting their muscles and bones, but it was definitely enough to be recorded in the history of the war for all the people of the Alliance to remember and learn from. Have I been slapped in the face? Duque smiled bitterly. Onyxia came. She used the ultra-high temperature of deep breath to burn the thick layer of ice. Coupled with Duque's fire magic, this was only able to suppress Maligos by a little. The layer of ice in the pit of the arena was decreasing at a speed visible to the naked eye. However, everyone knew that at this pace, by the time they forced Maligos to escape, the corpses of the Alliance warriors, led by Milhouse, would have turned cold. Duque could even foresee that when they killed their way to the bottom of the pit, they probably wouldn't even be able to collect their corpses. With Arthas's vengeful personality, he would definitely turn these warriors into immortals and place them in Ice Crown Fortress to wait for the arrival of the Alliance army after strengthening them. Perhaps, there would be another lich called Milhouse Mana Storm. Just as Duque's thoughts were running wild, a shrill scream suddenly came from under the ice. Bastard! What are you doing? Who are you? Chapter 1669. If it weren't for the holy light under the ice that was as bright as the sun, Duke would definitely think that Maligos was a lunatic. His dragon goo had split into two wills and then directed and acted on his own. It was true that Maligos was the pharaoh of all elements, but his power definitely did not include the holy element. It was obvious that a top-tier holy knight had ambushed Maligos. This holy light was definitely not ordinary. Even Riadaline and Merid, who were known as the top holy knights in the Alliance, were slightly inferior to this holy light. Duque's head was about to explode, but he still could not figure out which fellow's holy light was so powerful. Moreover, this holy light gave him an inexplicable sense of familiarity. Unfortunately, due to the extremely surging and evil frost elemental energy of Maligos, his perception was rather blurry. Even the system elf could not give an accurate judgment. Could it be that Turalian and the others have returned? Isn't this too much of a coincidence? Duque muttered to himself. The dragon lich's crazy voice came from below again. No. I am the king of magic of Azeroth, I am the original god of magic. All elements must be under my control of the magic net. Oh, no, go back. Yes, my master. As Duque, Jaina, Onyxia, and Salyafar watched in astonishment, Maligos' elemental reaction left the arena at high speed through the underground tunnel. Maligos ran away with his tail between his legs, and the thick layer of ice was no longer a problem. The doubts in his heart grew stronger. Duque could not wait to break the ice. He left the Black Dragon Princess here to continue melting the ice while he teleported to the lowest level of the cave with Jaina. Stepping out of the portal, the first thing that came into view was the huge corpse of the Arachne king, Anub'alak. This four-legged, two-pincer beetle king's evil soul had already dissipated. The double-headed sword that was imbued with a holy aura was the weapon that gave it the fatal blow. Duque recognized it immediately. This was the Ashkandi sword of the Brotherhood. There was no mistaking the scarlet sword hilt and the two red dragon heads that formed the sword's edge. Although this item had considerable historical significance, no one in the current Alliance heroes would ever use this low-level epic weapon again. Soon, Duque found the answer he was looking for. Duque's eyes widened. He almost thought that his eyes were deceiving him. Even though the weathering of old age had already covered his face, even though the pressure of time had made this old man a little hunchbacked, Duque could still recognize him at a glance based on the iconic white armor with red edges. Alexandros? That's right, standing in the middle of the dark cave was an old friend of Duque's, old Mograine. Why are you here? Aren't you retired? While Duque asked, he finally noticed the tall, stalwart figure beside old Mograine, who was smiling bitterly. It was a typical Death Knight. Looking at the Death Knight's face that was 70% similar to the young Mograine, Duque understood everything. I didn't expect it to be you. Darien. Duque sighed. It was a mess. It was King mess. Sometimes, Duque had to admire his own ability to stir up trouble. Because of his appearance, Azeroth's history had already been turned upside down. Old Mograine had retired, but he was still full of vigor. He had retired because he was disheartened. After all, the betrayal of his eldest son, Reynold, and the murder of his second son, Darien, with his corpse taken away had deeply affected old Mograine. Since old Mograine had appeared here without a word and with his youngest son who had turned into a Death Knight, there was only one answer. Answer me, Darien Mograine, have you broken free from the Lich King's shackles? Yes, Your Excellency Duke Marcus. Darien knelt on one knee, held the helmet in his left hand, and lightly touched the ground with his right hand as he saluted Duque. Duque looked around and saw the Alliance warriors who were still relatively spirited. He also saw the Death Knights standing at the side with their two-handed greatswords in their hands. He also saw the Wagri twins who had turned into soul dregs. Duque was even more certain of his judgment. All right. I'm not an unreasonable guy who sticks to the rules. Tell me the story of you and your subordinates. Thank you, Your Excellency Marcus. Darien's cold face squeezed out a happy smile. In the original history, old Mograine died early due to the betrayal of his eldest son, Reynold. After his father's death, Darien participated in and led the Silver Dawn's attack on Naxxramas. He defeated his father in battle and took back the fallen Ashbringer. Then, under the guidance of his father's soul, he went to see his brother, Reynold. However, after the brothers met, Reynold attacked Darien without any explanation. At this time, old Mograine's soul appeared and killed Reynold. Darien did not know the ins and outs, but seeing his father's soul kill his brother with his own hands, he was confused. Later, he found his father's good friend, Tyrion Fordring, who told him that only the power of love could release his father's soul. Darien then joined the battle against Arthas and the Scourge. He waved Ashbringer and cut through all the obstacles until he met the culprit, Kel Thuzad, who had turned his father into a Death Knight. After realizing that his sword could not stop this powerful necromancer, he stopped his horse, thought of his love for his father, and stabbed Ashbringer into his chest. This action summoned 1,000 heroic spirits buried under the chapel, thus defeating the Scourge force. After that, Darien's body was brought back by Kel Thuzad and turned into a Death Knight. In this life, Darien's experience was not so legendary. After his brother betrayed him, he was killed and directly taken away to become a Death Knight. He did not belong to Kel Thuzad, but directly belonged to Arthas and was crowned with the title of Great Lord. He led the Akiris Death Knights to guard the Black Front Fortress in the northwest of the Icecrown Glacier. Originally, the story would end here. However, things changed because of Duque and Alexstrasza's heavy injuries to Arthas. Darien said in a deep voice, "At that time, Your Excellency and the Red Dragon Queen injured Arthas, which made the Lich King's soul shackles on us lessen a lot. However, this was not enough to free us from the Lich King's control. So I used the soul connection and found my father." Chapter 1670. Duque turned his head and glared at old Emo. "Hey! You really dared to do that?" Old Emo blushed and stammered, "Alas! I've been loyal to Lordaeron for most of my life. I've fought trolls, orcs, demons and undead. If my bloodline caused trouble for the kingdom and the alliance, I wouldn't be able to rest in peace. Duque rolled his eyes. So you sneaked into Northrend and found your way to the Black Edge Knights camp? Weren't you afraid that you would become the new Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse? I was. I felt very guilty. I felt sorry for the Alliance. I wanted to report to you alone many times. But I chose to keep the appointment. I waited for Darien outside the Ice Crown Glacier. Old Mograine said it casually, but who could understand his feelings? After so many inner struggles, both of his sons had become Death Knights. One was a shameless betrayal, and the other was a temporary sinking that might still have redemption. One was honor, duty, and loyalty, and the other was bloodline, feelings, and hope. Duque admitted that he didn't know what to do if he exchanged his identity with Mograine. Either choice was not wrong. No matter which choice it was, it could lead to extremely terrifying consequences. If he wasn't a transmigrator, he could never foresee the independence and rise of the Black Edge Knights, let alone the reaction of the Alliance. After all, before this moment, even if the Alliance turned a blind eye to the Horde's undyings, they might not accept a group of Death Knights, even if they were neutral. Old Mograine's gaze seemed to look into the distant past, the time when his two children were still young. I dedicated half of my life to the kingdom and the rest to the Alliance. I didn't retire until I couldn't fight anymore. I'm ashamed of my selfishness. I don't deserve to be a paladin who spreads the holy light. Old Mo sighed. When I came to Northrend, I listened to the whispering wind and gazed at the broken world. I looked at the scenery that seemed to be the end of the world. It was like a harsh place where nothing was born, but I felt that the world was so beautiful. It seemed that everything could be started again. I thought that since even an Astrian could break free from the Lich King's shackles, my youngest son should have a chance too. At this point, old Mo pulled open his breastplate, which contained the latest explosive pack of the Alliance. I won't let the Alliance soldiers have to face a Death Knight named Alexandros Mograine. If necessary, I will self-destruct. A Death Knight without a body isn't strong. At this moment, Darien lowered his head and said in a deep voice, "Please don't blame my father. This is just the wish of a group of undead who still love the Alliance and desire that their compatriots can still be happy. We don't ask for anything in return. Even if we have to charge towards the Ice Crown Fortress first and use our destruction to pave the way for the Alliance, we will have no regrets." Duque closed his eyes as if he was deep in thought. Almost at the same time, Duque received the news that the Calamity Troop had begun to retreat. Duque sighed. "I can't promise you anything, but I will give you a chance to state the situation of you and your Black Edge Knights and your wishes in the Alliance's throne conference. Whether or not to accept you, or how to treat you, will be decided after the leaders of the Alliance vote." "Thank you very much," Mograine and Mograine said in unison. Not taking action on the spot was already giving them face. Convening the throne conference for this actually meant that Duque had given them the green light. Otherwise, even if Duque killed Mograine and Mograine on the spot, no one could say anything wrong. The defensive battle was over. The Alliance's battle line didn't retreat. Instead, Duque ordered to strengthen the defense. The trenches, pillboxes, and other fortifications at the front line were turned on 24/7. The wealthy Duque kept transferring elements from other elemental realms to replenish the energy of the shields. The commanders of the Alliance chased the soldiers who were warm out of the barracks and strengthened the fortifications again. The army gathered at the Cliffs of Storm and the Crystal Song Forest, while the rest of the areas were patrolled by the wyverns of the Sleeping Dragon Temple. There were also enough reserves left in the Northwind Taiga and other places, ready to counterattack at any time. 3 days later, the throne conference began in Naxxramas. Half of the Alliance's leaders attended, while the rest watched and voted through the magic mirror. When Mograine and Mograine gave their speeches, expressing that the Black Edge Knights were willing to fight together with the Alliance, the leaders fell into a long silence. Then, it was limited to whispers in the magic communication network. Unexpectedly, the first to speak was William. Is it okay to break the boundary between the dead and the living just like that? Today, the Alliance accepted the Death Knights as temporary allies. What about tomorrow? Closer cooperation? And then integration into the Alliance? What about the legacy of the kingdom? Accepting the undead would definitely be the biggest reaction from the humans. Perhaps long-lived creatures like the elves, dwarves, gnomes and Draenei didn't feel anything. Didn't they see how Kale, that's waited for thousands of years for an Astrian to die? Was he forced to wait for an extremely long time until something happened? Among the leaders of the 7 great human kingdoms, Kai Zi seemed to be the kind of guy who didn't feel anything about this topic. The problem was that there were still 3 leaders in the Alliance who were freaking immortal. If there was an issue of inheritance, it would definitely be between William and Donnas, the 2 brothers who had suffered the same fate. They would also be the first to speak. Be it the 2 of them or the other human leaders, they were actually not worried about the Black Edge Knights themselves, but the impact it would cause on the ethics of human society. Donna's Trollbane used his finger to tap on his throne for a while before saying, "Commander Marcus, first of all, I would like to ask, is it the Alliance's absolute policy to accept more forces that can be accepted?" Duque said resolutely, "The Burning Legion will definitely return. In 10 years, no more than 20 years, a war of survival with Azeroth as the battlefield will begin. I think the scene of Archimonde's arrival and the destruction of the Dalagen is still fresh in most people's minds, right?" Everyone was silent. Magni said, "The tribe accepts the Forgotten Ones because the tribe has the tradition of using Death Knights. But the tribe is not the Alliance. Why do we believe that the Death Knights of the Black Edge Knights won't turn on the Alliance and all the living at the critical moment?" Both Mograine and Big Mograine shuddered at the same time. They couldn't say for sure about this. Chapter 1671. At this moment, Duque stood up. He first filled himself with holy light, and then switched to his shadow form, becoming a pure, black man. Where there is light, there will be shadows. In fact, there are already some priests in the Alliance who have completed the switch between holy and shadow forms. We call these priests who focus on attack, shadow priests. Since the power of the shadows can arm our priests and warlocks, why can't we believe in the kindness of a group of Death Knights? Magni shook his head. I have no intention of targeting this. I think that includes me, the other leaders, and the people. We all need a convincing proof. Duque raised his hand. All right then. The boundary between life and death is not as clear as everyone thinks. I know that there are more than 1,000 souls sleeping under the Light's Hope Chapel. Let Darien and his Ebon Horsemen face the valiant spirits. If they are recognized by the souls, I believe the people will not have any objections. Duke changed the topic and looked at William and Donnas. As for inheritance, why don't we do it this way? When a person really dies, since he has crossed the boundary between life and death, this person will be defined as losing all assets other than his personal equipment. Unless he still chooses to fight for the Alliance, let him return to dust, dust to dust. William and Donnas looked at each other, and said at the same time, then we have no objections. Seeing that the leaders of the Alliance had almost reached a consensus, Imriel also fell silent. It could be considered as acquiescence. Duque raised his hands and stretched out all his fingers. Everyone, we don't have much time. The next 10 years will be the most turbulent 10 years for Azeroth. Even if we defeat the Lich King Arthas, there are still many evil existences in this world. For example, there are scattered demons, dark forces that believe in evil cults, and remnants of the Black Dragon race. We will most likely have to face the other two ancient gods, Yashaji and En-Zoth. We don't have time to relax. So my request to the Alliance is to unite all the forces that can be united, and at the same time, put aside any disputes that might cause conflicts until after the final battle with the Burning Legion. But on the other hand, if we are faced with a situation where we have no choice but to send troops, then we must not hesitate and directly send troops to destroy all the unrest in the bud. Duque clenched his fingers into a fist and smashed it down. It was clearly a simple movement, but because Duque had unintentionally released a small amount of elemental energy, this punch had the power of a war hammer. Something seemed to shatter in the air. Were those the shackles of the soul? Or was it an untimely tradition? No one went back to care. Compared to the fate of the entire race and even the entire planet, these were all trivial matters. As soon as Duque finished speaking, voices of agreement and approval came from the crowd of thrones. The throne meeting ended just like that. Old Mograine came up, his mouth trembling. In the end, he could only say, "Thank you." Duque pursed his lips into a smile and patted the old man who had spent most of his life in the army, broken the shackles of fate, and fought for the Alliance until his death. "Don't thank me. If you want to thank me, wait until Darien passes the appraisal of the hero spirit." Old Mo hurriedly said, "That's not a problem. I have already asked His Majesty Menethil, Benedicus, and Tyrion to cast holy light on Darien." The holy light did not destroy the body and soul of him and his men. Without needing Old Mo to press him, Darien had already bowed deeply. "It's all thanks to Sir Marcus' guidance." Duque's smile grew wider. "I have saved myself, and I have also saved many evil souls that the outside world believed had fallen into the abyss. One more is not much, one less is not little. As long as you can pass, it proves that your heart is pure enough, and your will is firm enough. Go. As long as you pass, I will propose to give the Black Blade Knights an independent status." In fact, everyone knew that this was just a formality. Under the witness of tens of thousands of Rotterdam citizens and over 1,000 warriors of the Scarlet Cross Legion and the Silver Dawn, dozens of Death Knights led by Darien withstood the holy water baptism of the Light's Hope Cathedral and the test of the hero spirits. They even miraculously proved that they could also recover from their injuries under the healing of the holy light. At first, Arthas was a little happy that the Calamity Troop had dealt a blow to the Alliance, but the news of the Black Blade Knight's betrayal immediately made him very unhappy. Almost on the same day he received the news, he ordered the Calamity Troop to launch a strong attack on the Black Blade Knight's camp. However, all the attacks became useless with Duque's arrangement. Hodier, the guardian of the Ice Shrine Oder, and Turawan, the Ice Warden, were directly stationed in the Black Blade Knight's fortress according to Duque's request. Not only them, but Calegos, who had just been appointed as the Blue Dragon King, and the few remaining members of the Blue Dragon Legion were also thrown into the Black Blade Knight's air force by Duque. With 3 demigod powerhouses stationed, Arthas could not do anything. The status and combat power of the Guardians were not inferior to that of the dragon aspects, especially Hodier. This kind of cold area was Arthas' home ground, so was it not for Hodier? A surprise attack was fine. However, if the surprise attack failed, Arthas might fall into a protracted battle. When Duque, Alexstrasza, and the others arrived, the two fools would not have a chance to return to Ice Crown Fortress. It was no exaggeration to say that the Alliance army used Darien's betrayal to drive a ruthless nail into the Ice Crown Glacier. It became a fishbone in Arthas' throat, making him very uncomfortable. Under normal circumstances, if they did not attack the Gate of Heaven's Wrath, the Alliance army would have to attack from the low terrain of the Crystal Song Forest to the north to enter Ice Crown Fortress. Then, following the terrain, they would have to go around a huge protrusion in the deep valleys of the plateau before finally reaching Ice Crown Fortress. Along the way, they would also be attacked from the cliffs. This was an absolute taboo for military strategists. Only when they had no other choice would they carry out such an attack. Now, with the recovery of order and the betrayal of the Black Blade Knights, the Alliance army was able to suppress the Calamity Army's forces in the northwest and northeast of Ice Crown Glacier. This was especially so for the Shadow Vault, where the Black Blade Knights were. With this nail, the Calamity Army would not be able to station a large number of troops in the Iron Wall Dam to the east of Ice Crown Glacier, the Door of Death Mordressa, and the Door of Desolation to the north, Ordrisa. The only thing that could truly obstruct the Alliance army's attack was the Door of Fear, Kaelisa, in front of Ice Crown Fortress. Of course, they still could not let their guard down, because behind the Door of Fear, there were still the Dark Cathedral, and Malakaris, Evil Castle, the two bases of the Calamity Army guarding Ice Crown Fortress. Chapter 1672. Even so, Duque was still very satisfied. Looking at the image of the Gate of Fear through the magic eye, Duque's mouth curved into a thick smile. Smashing one door is always more convenient than smashing 3 doors. The betrayal of the Black Edge Knights confirmed the famous saying, "The strongest fortress is always breached from the inside." With the Shadow Vault as a base point, Duque unscrupulously teleported over and smashed the Scourge Army's Wizard Tower. The blizzard that surrounded the entire Ice Crown Glacier was not natural. It was a magic fulcrum that the former Lich King, Azul, had specially set up on several important elemental veins of the Ice Crown Glacier. Relying on the Wizard Tower on these fulcrum, Azul's magic could pass through the entire Ice Crown Glacier without any hindrance. The Black Edge Knights had killed the Lich in the Wizard Tower as soon as they betrayed the Lich. Duque had only gone over to clean up the mess. The entire Ice Crown Glacier had a total of 7 fulcrum points, with the evil Malakaris Castle as the center, forming a hexagram. It did not mean that the hexagram would become a pentagram by itself if one of its corners was removed. That kind of unbalanced collapse was the most fatal. Duque estimated that as long as his magic network completed its invasion of the Shadow Vault and took root here, the power of the blizzard around the Ice Crown Glacier would be reduced by at least 50%. The difference between the original cannonballs that could not fly in and the largest flying battleships could fly in was like heaven and earth. Because of this, Darian's surrender was very precious. Taking advantage of this opportunity, the Allied forces surrounded the Ice Crown Glacier from all sides. The Black Edge Knights were in the northwest, the Crusader Trial Arena was in the northeast, the Dalajan army was in the southeast, and the Winter Lake Fortress where the Alcavan treasury was located was in the southwest. In January, Duque let Naxxramas launch a surprise attack and directly took down the Balagard Fortress in the west of the Ice Crown Glacier. In the second half of this winter, the Scourge Army and the Allied forces were in a state of tug-of-war. Arthas, who was unwilling to give up, launched a dozen large-scale attacks of millions of bones and 3 large-scale attacks of 5 million bones. From the remains of small animals like wild rabbits to the gigantic mammoth zombies and bone dragons, it was simply overwhelming. The price the Allied forces paid for the attacks of 5 million bones was an average of 35,000 deaths per battle, as well as the destruction of more than 1,000 tanks and heavy artillery. This was after the coalition army had used a large number of modern cannons to resist the Calamity Army's Corps C tactic. Otherwise, it would not be surprising if the casualties were doubled. The number of casualties made Duque and Sal look quite bad. Duque was worried because of the astronomical military expenditure. Sal was angry because of the loss of human life. It couldn't be helped. The Alliance army was developing towards diversity. The most basic close combat sword and shield soldiers were the fewest. With the addition of the Horde, when it came to infantry battles, the main force would definitely be the Orc infantry. The only thing that could comfort Sal was that the weapons provided by the Alliance were quite sophisticated. They were all steel weapons that had been blessed by the Holy Light. Their strength and tenacity were praiseworthy, much better than the ones produced by the tribe. Moreover, the Alliance promised that the Horde could take these weapons with them after this battle. Even the weapons used by the dead could be sent back to Kalimdor's relatives as relics. This kind of kindness won the unanimous praise of the Horde Expeditionary Army. It wasn't that there were no regrets. The remains of the dead couldn't be carried away. They had to be cremated on the spot, which conflicted with the traditional orc shaman doctrine. But there was no other way. It wasn't safe to sprinkle holy water on the corpses. As long as the Lich's dark magic smashed over, when the power of darkness surpassed the light, the corpses would still come back to life. But at least they managed to withstand it. Throughout the winter, the Alliance's factories didn't stop working, maintaining a 3-shift state to produce arms and military supplies. At the most critical time, even Duque had to use the magic of the magic net to open fixed portals in order to transport the wounded to the rear and transport the most scarce ammunition to the front lines. Time entered March 26 of the Dark Portal. The characteristics of Northrend as a polar continent, coupled with the high altitude of the Ice-Crown Glacier Plateau, meant that there wouldn't be any spring flowers blooming here. Just the temperature went from a few degrees below zero to a few degrees below zero. This was spring. Without the cover of the winter snowstorm, Arthas finally restrained his arrogance. The Scourge army almost completely retreated, only staying in the Ice-Crown Glacier area. In Naxxramas, in the Alliance meeting hosted by Duque, all the big shots either sent someone to attend or sent a magic message. The time to attack the Ice-Crown Glacier has come, Duque declared at the beginning of the meeting. Why not wait until summer? Although it's spring now, the cold will still weaken the power of the Red Dragon Army's draconic breath. Duque said in a deep voice, "We can't wait anymore. Recently, I've detected many teleportation portals. Arthas must have sent a large number of low-level liches out, probably to collect corpses. If we wait too long, I'm afraid we'll be surrounded in Northrend. Even if we can hold on, it'll put a lot of pressure on the logistics. By June, we can either reduce the number of troops by 200,000, or the entire Northern Expedition Coalition army will starve and only be half full every day." In Northrend, after continuous replenishment, the Alliance and Horde had a total of 500,000 troops. With so many people eating, drinking, and the corresponding military supplies, if it weren't for Duque, the super internal affairs officer with the system elf, just the logistics deployment would probably make the 1,000-man logistics headquarters go crazy. After all, not counting the summary and judgment, there were already more than 3,000 logistics officers carrying out logistics work. And that didn't include the non-military logistics personnel. Fortunately, as early as the Battle of Mount Hyjal, the Alliance began to focus on training logistics personnel for cross-sea warfare. Only then did they barely have enough logistics officers. In fact, the merchant ships of the Marcus family, Kurtiras, and Alterac family, apart from the necessary regular trade ships, had all been called up to supply Northrend. But it was still not enough. "All right. Let's fight." Sar sighed. Losing 100,000 soldiers in one winter would be a huge blow to the Horde that had just arrived at Kalimdor. Even with Draenor's beastmen, 100,000 young and strong beastman warriors was still not a small loss. It'd be good if there were more troops, at least the attack could be formed in batches, Magni muttered. Sar suddenly thought of something. "Yes, the Horde's forsaken. Anastrian said they're willing to fight." Duque's eyes suddenly lit up. Chapter 1673. Not only Duque, but the eyes of the other Alliance bigwigs also lit up. The factors involved were complicated. Back then, the Forsaken led by Anastrian established a kingdom in Lordaeron and almost established the Undercity, which left a deep psychological scar on the people and elves of Lordaeron. If it weren't for the fact that they couldn't spare their hands, perhaps the Alliance would have hunted them down long ago. There wouldn't have been a new Undercity in Winterspring, and they wouldn't have found a chance to join the tribe. On the other hand, the Undying's thugs were actually quite useful. The Undying, who didn't need food or supplies, and didn't fear the cold, could be said to be the best cannon fodder. For example, the activity of the Black Blade Knights in the winter left a deep impression on the Alliance bigwigs. From a commander's point of view, sometimes they wished that their subordinates were all obedient and powerful Death Knights. On the other hand, the Alliance wouldn't feel the pinch no matter how many people died in the tribe. If an Astrian was really willing to allow the few Forsaken to join the battle, it would be a useful addition no matter what. In fact, Sal was also tempted by the Sun King's proposal. For a while, Sal almost thought that the Forsaken were going to betray the tribe. After urging him a few times, the Sun King was finally willing to send out 50,000 Forsaken. Sal had seen the quality of this batch of soldiers. Very few were beast men, and they were basically the corpses of humans and elves. As for the source, Sal didn't care. Anyway, the Alliance didn't protest, so Sal pretended not to see it. This was also the mentality of digging up one's ancestral grave, and it didn't matter how many bones came. In the end, the 50,000 Forsaken went out to fight. In addition to the most elite high-grade alchemists and magic researchers, as well as some elites guarding Winterspring. It was no exaggeration to say that an Astrian pulled in all the old ones. In the northwest of the Crystal Song Forest, Duque saw the Sun King and couldn't help but tease him, "Yo, an Astrian. You're really willing. The Forsaken belong to the tribe, and we are all loyal to the Great Chief. Since it's the Great Chief's call, we will obey. Now that the tribe and the Alliance are allies, Sir Marcus won't order your subordinates to attack your allies, right?" Since it was a dead face, there was no expression to speak of. No one could read an Astrian's thoughts from his fiery eyes. "Ha! You sure know how to talk. Don't worry, the Alliance will never attack our allies. Not in the past, not now, and definitely not in the future." Of course, Duque dared to say this out loud. However, Duque changed the topic. "That's right, I always feel that you're a guy who won't get up early without benefits. Why are you willing to bet almost all of the Forgotten Ones?" In the face of Duque's questioning, the Sun King was not annoyed. In his deep and dark eye sockets, his fiery eyes moved to the right and looked at Darien. The Alliance can accept Death Knights, so why can't the Forsaken of the Horde accept their undead compatriots who are freed from the bondage of the Lich King? His words sounded quite reasonable. The Alliance leaders all had expressions on their faces. Although the Scourge army was the enemy of the world, the Forsaken could use war to sustain war if they operated well. Compared to Arthas's brutal double enslavement of the mind and soul, the freedom of the Forsaken was, of course, more attractive to the undead freed from slavery. Perhaps, if the boss of the Black Blade Knights was not Darien Mograine, but a former Horde Orc chief, perhaps the Black Blade Knights, which had thousands of high-level Death Knights, would have been taken advantage of by the Horde. Duque, and only Duque, looked at an Astrian with eyes full of ridicule. This kind of look that seemed to see through everything made the Sun King very uncomfortable. He said in a bureaucratic tone, "Your Excellency Supreme Commander Marcus, the Forsaken army is preparing to attack. Do you have any additional instructions?" Duque smiled. "No. I'm eager to see the active figures of the Forsaken on the battlefield. You'll see it." With that, the Sun King turned around and left. At 9:00 in the morning on March 15, year 26 of the Dark Portal, the Allied forces formed by the Alliance, the Horde, and the Sleeping Dragon launched an attack on the Ice-Crown Glacier from 6 directions at the same time. The first to fire the cannon was the Balagard Fortress on the high mountain to the west of the Ice-Crown Glacier. After the Alliance captured this place, they used the mobility of the floating fortress, their overwhelming military strength, and their advantage in top-level combat power to take down the Kurgala Fortress, which was further east. Then, they used half of the winter to strengthen the 2 fortresses and the fortress, installing more than 500 modern cannons on them, the smallest of which had a diameter of 203 millimeters. At 9 o'clock, together with a total of 2,000 cannons on Naxxramas, they poured artillery shells on the Gate of Fear, Kailisa, in the east, and the Dark Cathedral in the southeast. In just 3 hours, more than 50,000 artillery shells of various sizes were fired. Although they were unable to destroy the fortress-level ice shield, as well as the Gate of Fear, which was a full 30 meters thick and 100 meters tall, they successfully flattened most of the Dark Cathedral, which nurtured dark wizards. The huge dome was directly blown up. The Wintergrasp Lake Fortress in the southwest was quiet. The Alliance would not attack from this side. After all, although the Ice-Crown Fortress was to the northeast of Wintergrasp Lake. Only an idiot would choose to attack a fortress on a high mountain that was more than 1,000 meters higher than Wintergrasp Lake from a place with an elevation of 70 degrees. The real battle was on the southeastern side of the Crystal Song Forest. The first to attack was the Dalajan. The Dalajan, personally led by Kael, did not directly take the brunt of the Scourge Army's anti-air artillery. After all, the Dalajan was first the capital of an alliance kingdom, then a holy land of magic, and finally a fortress. It was completely different from a floating fortress like Naxxramas, which specialized in flying around the world to cause trouble. The Dalajan's mage tower was enough to make the mages' hearts ache for a long time if any one of them was destroyed. Therefore, the Dalajan's role this time was to support. It flew to an altitude of 3,000 meters, and then poured mud down. Yes. It was filling up the river. The Ice-Crown Glacier's defense line was at the most gentle mountain pass, which happened to be the source of the River of Weakness. Tens of thousands of tons of mud were poured down, and in just an hour, the source of the River of Weakness was completely filled up. Almost at the same time that the river was filled up, the Dalajan began to descend and pour magic cannons at the Iron Wall Dam, which guarded the mountain pass. Chapter 1674. Times were changing, technology was developing, and the development of magic continued. Compared to the Dalajan that had suffered heavy losses during the battle with Naxxramas. Now, the Dalajan was on a path of no return in the direction of the magic stronghold. It still looked like those purple domes and towering spires. In reality, the magic circuit structure inside was completely different. Kael knew that his position as the chairman of the Kirin Tor was only in name. In reality, the entire Dalajan was still under Duke's absolute control. Apart from that, the runes and mana transmission channels of every wizard tower in the Dalajan were all connected to Duke's weave. In a sense, the Dalajan was the core of the weave, just that it was at the same level as Karazhan. Duke was more willing to call it a double core. The Dalajan was the most important chess piece to break the Lich King Arthas elemental monopoly in the Ice-Crown Glacier. Its approach caused the hexagram magic formation, which had become incomplete due to the betrayal of the Black Edge Knights, to become even more fragmented. The sky was no longer filled with bone-chilling winds and fluttering white snowflakes. The entire sky was now occupied by the purplish blue of arcane energy. From time to time, zigzagging lightning flashed. In the void, the layers of clouds and various elemental turbulence were mixed together, boiling like porridge. In the sky above the Dalajan, a small vortex appeared on the left, center, and right. In just a few minutes, it was like a rock hitting water, creating ripples in the air that spread outwards. In the end, it formed 3 huge circles of red, white, and purple. Every circle was more than a kilometer in diameter. Anyone with the slightest elemental sensitivity would know that this was the largest elemental passage in history that the Dalajan, the core of the weave, had opened. It corresponded to the fire, water, and wind elemental realms. More black dots flickered in the storm caused by the elemental turbulence, like black sesame seeds dotting the sky. Every time the blue and white radiance flashed, a morning star wizard dressed in magic robes would be left standing on a 10-meter square conical floating stone. If one were to observe carefully, they would discover that the floating stone that every mage was standing on was actually a node of a magic array that was half hidden and frozen in midair. These magi, who were at least at the morning star rank, spread out in the 2-kilometer-wide sky. In ancient times when magic civilization was not so developed, mortals would be more willing to call these mages oracles, right? Duque's promotion of the Weave didn't bring more top-ranked wizards to the Alliance, but the number of mid-ranked and low-ranked wizards in the Alliance grew exponentially. These 10,000 sky mages were the best proof. Although they all had various drawbacks of rapid growth, their combat strength was real. On the Calamity Army's side, every Undying looked up at the sky. There was a moment of silence on the battlefield. The 12 huge flying warships were like 12 pages of a book. They circled around the Dalajan and slowly turned to face the dam. The muzzles of the magic cannons that stretched out from the opened cannons shone brightly under the elemental radiance. Those with sharp eyes would notice that the insignia of Duque's storm was engraved on the barrel of each cannon. When the 12 magical warships, which were built using the same principles as the floating city, turned around one by one and aimed at the dam with one side of the ship's side. The giants guarding the dam keenly felt a great danger looming over them. There was no sound in the sky, only the sounds of nature. All the commands were transmitted and communicated in the domain of magic. Magic warships in position. Open the cannons. In the next moment, the 12 warships shook violently. One side of their hull suddenly shot out a rainbow light that wasn't fire. It was the radiance of high-purity fire elemental energy. Roar! Before the Alliance soldiers could react, the 6-story-tall giants standing on the defensive line of the dam let out a deafening roar. A bright explosion suddenly spread across the entire defensive line of the dam. This was just the appetizer. When the magic warships poured all their firepower on the giant undead creatures, the new generation of more advanced magic-infused cannons that were directly connected to the magic net began to display their power. If the traditional magic cannons only turned the giant undead creatures into human-shaped torches, it would take a while to burn their bodies and souls to ashes. But the new magic-infused cannons could not only destroy the undead creatures, but they could also directly threaten the fortress that had been strengthened by magic runes. When the Dalajan fired all the magic cannons toward the northwest, even Arthas, who was watching the battle from the ice throne in the distant Ice-Crown fortress, raised his head subconsciously and faced the direction of the Dalajan. It was simple. In that instant, even he, the Lich King, felt threatened. Rumble! There was an earth-shattering explosion. Immediately, when the cannons stopped firing, the members of the Silver Hand Knights, led by Theon, quickly rushed to the giants of flesh and blood who had not yet fallen under the cannons. More than 100 holy knights raised their weapons at the same time, descending from the sky in a horse-slashing stance and swinging their weapons at the monsters. More than 100 streaks of holy aura extended from the flame-shaped weapons in their hands, piercing through the monsters whose life force had fallen to its lowest point in an instant. Many undead creatures were directly blown up. At the southern end of the plains that were once filled by the River of Weakness, Anastrian, the Sun King, silently watched the collapsing defensive line of the Scourge. If it had been 20 years earlier, this terrifying defensive line would not have been shaken at all. But now, the huge dam was collapsing, and fragments the size of houses were falling down. All the undead creatures except the undead creatures below were flattened. The skeleton archers with bows and arrows, as well as the liches with magic staffs, who were neatly lined up on the dam, were all flattened. If it were not for the fact that there was a steady stream of Scourge soldiers pouring out of the secret passage behind the dam, the Sun King would have even thought that the defensive line had been completely destroyed, and that the Forsaken under him would not be able to do anything. The Sun King raised his golden magic staff with a phoenix head high, and the deep voice of the soul spread throughout the spirit sea of all the Forsaken. For eternal death. With that, the army of undead creatures surged toward the higher mountain pass of the Ice-Crown Glacier. It was like water flowing backwards, giving people a discordant and dazed feeling. Chapter 1675. The Forsaken were not simple skeletons or zombies. Their independence was partly due to the fact that the Lich King, Azul, had relaxed his mind control. On the other hand, it was also because they had the strongest mind and willpower among their kind. With willpower, it was always easy for one to stand out from the crowd. After experiencing the betrayal of the Calamity Army, the chaotic battle with the Alliance in Lordaeron City, and surviving in the dangerous Winterspring, the main force of the Forsaken was now quite elite. Kale, who was sitting in the tallest mage tower in Dalajan City, looked coldly at the army of the Forsaken through the magic mirror. Kale, muttered to himself, more than 30,000 professionals. Over there were his former compatriots, as well as his deceased father. That figure, which was like a blazing sun, gave Kale, the illusion of yesterday. He was still the crown prince of Kuel Salis, and his father was still the Sun King, who was revered by the people. Unfortunately, that figure had become extremely unfamiliar, skinny, and full of an ominous aura. From the beginning, he could not understand his father's thoughts, and now, he could not understand even more. At this moment, as if sensing Kale, spying, Anastrian turned his head. He raised his dry face, which still retained the familiar outline, and grinned at Kale, Kale, was originally sitting on the Kirin Tor chairman's throne, holding his head. At this moment, he suddenly stood up, and his face turned ashen. Is he, mocking me? The silent grin only lasted for a short while. The Sun King did not continue to look at the floating castle in the sky. He turned around and began to move forward under the escort of a few high-level liches. Tens of thousands of Forsaken warriors waved the sharp blades provided by the Alliance, wore brand-new armor, and rushed toward the ruins of the dam. They were like marching ants, devouring all the Calamity warriors who attempted to resist along the way. They looked exactly the same, but they easily disassembled their compatriots into parts. The huge abominations belonging to the Forsaken waved heavy axes or meat cleavers, hacking at the struggling giants of flesh and blood. The entire hillside was filled with a rotten stench. This was like a battlefield that no one had cleaned up. It was like a breeding ground for plague. In the sky, Kale, squinted his eyes. This was why the Alliance would never send troops to fight alongside the Forsaken. Just the stench alone was enough to reduce the combat power of the Alliance warriors by 30%. Therefore, the Alliance used the cooperation of all the air forces along the way. As long as the Calamity Army dared to launch an attack, the Dalajan would be responsible for intercepting and destroying them. Northwest. The Ebon Edge Knights of Shadow Vault were ready to depart. 5,000 Death Knights rode their skeletal war horses silently and stood on the plateau. They allowed the Alliance artillery unit behind them to pour shells into the canyon below the mountain. The Black Edge Knights would not attack now. They would only launch a pincer attack from the west, and the Alliance army attacked the desolate door, Al-Dusa. The only variable was in the northeast. What? William exclaimed in shock. You're saying that Uncle Duque ordered us to stop attacking and let Odor's mechanical gnome army take the lead? The one who appeared in front of William was Vanessa. She directly showed the order with Duque's seal. Damn it, we've been training in the arena for the whole winter, from field battles to siege battles. Our brothers are all rubbing their palms. We've been waiting for this day. Why did they suddenly stop? We're the vanguard. Valilla, one of the epic hero thieves and William's team, screamed. Regarding who was the number one thief in the Alliance, Valilla had always believed that if they had the same equipment, she would definitely be able to defeat Vanessa. Unfortunately, equipment was also a part of one's strength. In a situation where the difference in strength was not more than one level, she would always be defeated if her equipment was not good enough. Seeing that Vanessa had stopped the army's attack, Valilla was rather displeased. On the contrary, Druid Brawl Baremantle was the most mature and steady. Among the three of them, he often played the role of stabilizing the situation. William and Valilla were both the kind of characters who seemed calm but would roar fiercely once they started fighting. Only he was pulling the reins of the two of them, preventing them from courting death. Therefore, he grabbed Valilla's arm. "Uncle Duque, do you have any other commands?" William asked calmly. "Be careful of the tribe's siege weapons," Vanessa said seriously. "We found out that the Forsaken are carrying an unknown plague weapon. It's stored in a jar in liquid form and launched as a throwing weapon. I personally stole a little bit of it, and after Master Marcus' urgent research, I discovered that not only can it destroy the undying, but it also has a terrifying lethality to the living." After hearing Vanessa's words, William and the other two felt terrible. Items that could be used to destroy evil, such as holy water that was filled with divine power, were the most useful. Countless battles had proven that such single-use items were definitely the Calamity Army's nemesis. Moreover, holy water was not harmful to the human body, but beneficial instead. Its effects in exorcising evil and promoting the healing of wounds were rather significant. The Alliance had also provided the tribe with a large amount of holy water and standard holy light weapons. Why would the tribe not use such good and absolutely safe weapons and instead ship plague weapons? What was the meaning of this? Why don't you stop them? Or prohibit them from approaching the battlefield? William's tone was already a little stern. They have submitted an official report to the Alliance, saying that they want to test new weapons. William fell silent. The Alliance and the tribe were, after all, temporary allies. Both parties did not have a subordinate relationship. The Alliance could test new weapons in battle, and so could the tribe. They had made a report and warned them in advance. No matter how uneasy they were, they could only take precautions themselves and could not control the others. William almost gritted his teeth as he said, "Adjutant, inform the troops to stop advancing and change to a state of alert. Also, please inform His Excellency Varrock Salufar to come over." Valilla asked, "Do we really have to be so careful?" Brawl said, "Didn't you see that Commander Marcus specially sent someone to inform us? He didn't even use magic to send a message." To put it bluntly, magic transmission was just a variant application of magical energy transmission. Since it was magic, there was a possibility that it could be broken. Sun King Anastrian was one of the few master magicians in the world. No one knew exactly how powerful he was. Perhaps the one who had the highest chance of becoming a demigod after Duque was not Kaisi, but him. Chapter 1676. Salufar, who had been summoned, was quite surprised by William's announcement. "What happened? Why is everyone ready but not attacking? Didn't you hear the cannons from the other side of the mountain?" Salufar pointed to the far west. It was the sound of cannons coming from the Shadow Vault to the west of the Door of Desolation. William never liked to lie. Others could say that he was irritable or even bloodthirsty, but no one would say that he was a liar. He shook his head. "I received a direct order from the Alliance's Supreme Commander, Lord Duke Marcus. The Alliance's Northeast Front Army will temporarily postpone their attack. Older's Steel Army will attack first. Is there any new information that our tribe needs to know?" Varrock was more experienced. He could sense that William knew something, but refused to say it. William shook his head. "No comment. Whether to attack according to the plan is up to you, Sir Salufar. You can also ask Chief Sar before making a decision. Older's army will attack on time anyway." On the surface, it seemed that the Alliance was messing around by changing the order of attack without permission. The problem was that the four allied armies were not unified, and they were all marching through consultation. At this moment, the Alliance had launched an attack from at least 3 directions. It could not be said that the alliance was neglecting military strategy. Varroc's expression was very bad. "I will ask Chief Sar." Varrock did not say much and turned to leave. After he returned to the tribe's encampment, he connected a magic message to Orgrimmar. Sar was also worried. "What is Duque doing? This is not the Duke Marcus I know." What Jean reminded, is the Alliance conserving their forces? In the past few years, the Alliance's army has become less and less fond of close combat. Sar shook his head and said with certainty, "No. Duque is a wise and decisive person. When it is time to fight, he will never be stingy with his sacrifice. He cares more about the covenant between the Horde and the Alliance than I do. He has never done anything that goes against the Alliance. The only explanation for him doing this now is that he knows something but can't tell me because of the situation. Why don't we ask him directly?" What Jean suggested. Sar seemed to be talking to himself. "No. It's useless to ask. The reason he informed us through William is that he doesn't want to talk to me directly. According to my deduction, it must be our tribe's problem." What Jean asked, "What is the first stage of the original plan?" Varrock said, "Attack from multiple directions. However, the terrain is unfavorable in the west, so the main attack is long range. The southeast and northeast are the main attack. After the Forsaken troops in the southeast broke through the defense line of the Iron Wall Dam, they turned to attack the City of Calamity on the eastern highlands of the Icecrown Glacier. In the northeast, Otter's Steel Army would block any troops that might come from Desolation Gate and Death's Gate. My army will go from the north to the south, and King Rin's army will go from the east to the west through the Ladrasil Trail. We'll attack the City of Calamity from 3 directions. It was a 3 attack. If the Alliance suddenly stops, won't they be sending the Forsaken ones to die? What if? What Jean suddenly thought of something, but when he saw Sal's face and thought of Sal's efforts to unite the tribes, he suddenly became discouraged. Forget it, it's nothing. Sal was confused, but he didn't think too much about the big picture. I'm going to find Duque. Varrock, your people will continue to attack Scourge from the north. The Horde will not abandon its allies. We can't let the Anastrian people face the Scourge army alone. Understood. Varrock punched his chest. In order to catch up, Varrock had even allowed his son, Dranos, to lead the elites of the Blackrock clan and set off first. Although the Blackrock orcs didn't like the cold weather, as a clan that used to live in the mountains, they were very good at climbing mountains. On the other side, Sal found Duke. "Tell me, why did William's army stop marching in the northeast?" "We found that there was a mistake with a batch of artillery shells. The artillery shells, which are not suitable for use in the cold weather, were mistakenly shipped to the front line. If the Alliance troops launched an attack without the cover of heavy artillery, it would increase unnecessary casualties. I strongly suggest that you stop your army as well." Duque was an Azeroth Award winner, so he didn't even need to prepare a script to lie. "Is it true?" Sal asked. Duke shrugged with a look that said, "You guess." The uneasiness in Sal's heart grew stronger. But no matter what he said, Duque wouldn't budge. At most, he promised to push the Dalajan forward and send as many airships as possible. Unfortunately, due to the allocation of troops, they couldn't send more battleships to besiege Scourge. A cloud of uneasiness hung over the entire alliance. At 2:00 in the afternoon on March 15th, the Forsaken army and Dranos' orc army broke through the defense line of the Iron Wall Dam. They faced the majestic Scourge army in the south and north. The Scourge army was located in the eastern part of the Icecrown Glacier. It was an important fulcrum for Arthas to rule the entire region. There was a huge magical ley line second only to the Icecrown fortress. Unlike Duque's previous life, perhaps because the Alliance had put too much pressure on the Lich King, Arthas used this ley line to create an extremely powerful magic circle. Since last winter, there had been a terrifying level 10 gale every day. An ice tornado that would never move was always circling around the city of Calamity. Looking at the majestic city in front of him, Anastrian glanced at the Dalajan city that had followed the Forsaken army to this airspace. The Sun King contacted Kale, that's directly. President Kirin Tor, please immediately order the Dalajan's magic cannons to bombard the Scourge army and weaken its shield. Anastrian's address was very businesslike, and Kai Zi couldn't find fault with it. Facing his dead father, Kai Zi's feelings were extremely complicated. But after so many years of experience and being redeemed by Duque, Kale, that's had already gotten over it. Your Excellency Anastrian Sunstrider, don't we need to wait for the main force of the Horde? No need. I'm a powerful undead. I can clearly sense that Arthas has already abandoned this place. The undead inside are not the main force of the Scourge army. Our current forces are enough. Since you say so, as an ally, I have no objections. In 15 minutes, the Dalajan will launch an attack. Please judge the timing of the attack yourself, Your Excellency. The father and son, who had the same blood flowing in their veins, ended this exchange in a way that they were passers-by. Chapter 1677. Kale, that sighed softly. His face was a little gloomy. Your Highness. Great astrologer Carponia had never changed the way she addressed Kale, that's. Kai Zi waved his hand. There's nothing between me and the late king. We're separated by life and death, and our standpoints are different. There's nothing to talk about. The words late king made Kale, that stand clear. No one in the Kirin Tor parliament would say anything. Carponia bowed her head and retreated. Kale, that's also did not think that the Scourge army would defend the city of Calamity. First of all, the Scourge army would never treat any member of the army as an indispensable existence, except for the Lich King himself. The Lich King, who had no compassion, would only treat soldiers as expendable. The meaning of their existence was to kill the living and bring more Scourge soldiers. Secondly, it was the geographical location. If the Alliance was a traditional army, then the city of Calamity, which stood on a high mountain, would indeed be an important fulcrum. However, when the Alliance had a powerful air force and broke through the storm protection around the entire Icecrown Glacier, the city of Calamity would just be a slightly more dangerous castle. Moreover, the city of Calamity was too far away from the Icecrown Fortress. At the very least, they were separated by the Door of Death, Mordressa, and the evil castle, Maricaris. With the Icecrown Glacier being attacked from all sides, only Maricaris, which was in a triangular position with the Icecrown Fortress, should be heavily guarded by the Scourge army. In other words, the city of Calamity was destined to be abandoned. The only difference was how many soldiers it could replace in the Alliance. Confirm the status of the magic network. Prepare to charge the elements. Other than the main cannon, charge all mage towers. Listen to my command. Kale, that sat on the throne and gave a series of orders to the Dalajan. Soon, above the floating Dalajan, which was gradually approaching the city of Calamity, every mage tower lit up. The colorful elements made these mage towers of different heights look like they were celebrating a festival, filled with neon lights. Looking at the energy infusion meter of the dozens of mage towers in front of them, when all the columns showed more than 90%, Kale, that's waved his raised right hand. Fire! Carbonia's crisp voice was transmitted to the masters of each mage tower through magic. In the next second, the dazzling elements around the mage tower were rapidly compressed by the large magic array solidified by the mage tower itself. They turned into beams of bright light that easily crossed the 3,000 meters distance and blasted into the huge tornado that was spinning around the city of Calamity. The nature of the ice tornado was a combination of the ice and wind elements. When there were enough other elements to destroy the elemental laws and stable state here, the form of magic would also collapse. In the eyes of all the Allied army soldiers, the originally slender ice tornado became thick and fat, like a Coke bottle becoming a Coke can, and then a twisted Coke can. Kale, that's watched everything quietly with his sharp gaze. In his eyes that were filled with elements, he saw another mirror image. It was a diagram of the turbulent flow of elements. What mortals saw were fireworks, but as a breaking dawn archmage who had a high chance of becoming a demigod, what he saw was the balance of the elements. When the continuous magic cannon bombardment reached 36 seconds, Kale, that spat out a word, "Stop." Seeing her master nod slightly, Carbonia gave the order, "Begin the second stage." The so-called second stage seemed to be worthless. Because it was using the Dalajan anti-gravity system to suck up tens of thousands of tons of sand and stones, and then using something similar to a wind cannon, it shot the sand and stones at the City of Calamity. Of course, these so-called wind cannons were all magically driven. At first, the huge tornado could still continue to spin at high speed with the sand and stones it sucked in. As it spun, even the ordinary soldiers could tell that this tornado could not be used anymore. It became slower and slower, and more condensed. In less than a minute, the tornado that had been circling around the City of Calamity, as if it would never stop, finally came to an end. Without the sharp whistling sound, without the terrifying barrier that could easily blow away tanks, the City of Calamity was nothing more than a dish. Ha ha ha. Good job. On the snowy hillside in the north, the orcs led by Dranos raised their weapons and shouted wildly. In the west and south, the densely packed Forsaken warriors remained silent. The Sun King looked into the distance and suddenly found that the east side of the City of Calamity was covered in flying snow. Oh. The Alliance is still here. As long as one had telescopic magic or binoculars, it was not difficult to see the light tanks with the Alliance insignia through the flying snow. Perhaps it was because the mountain roads were narrow, and heavy tanks could not move easily. The light tanks that came were all less than 20 tons. This was not important. The insignia and flags of the tank troops were telling the tribe that this was the tank troops directly under Bulang Bronzebeard. Humph. I said they wouldn't come, but they still came. Dranos curled his lips, and then saw a signal flare rising above the Forsaken army, "Attack." Hey! When the Alliance's tanks charge first, we'll follow. The Alliance obviously came in a hurry, and they did not even bring infantry. In the past, the Alliance always liked to coordinate operations with multiple units. Perhaps it was because there were already Orc and Forsaken infantry at the scene, and there was a Dalajan overhead to cover them. This time, they directly drove the tank troops over. Boom! The familiar sound of cannons was still so deafening. It was a pity that they were all light tanks, and the largest barrel diameter was no more than 60 mm. They did not even have the latest 88 mm cannon, which felt like their firepower was a little lacking. As soon as the battle began, Dranos found that it did not matter. The Calamity army was famous for destroying without building. This City of Calamity had not been properly managed. The origin of the City of Calamity could no longer be investigated. The only thing that was certain was that it was an old-fashioned castle, built using traditional techniques, using tree trunks as stakes, and constantly ramming earth. It could not be compared to the reinforced concrete walls of the Alliance. Originally, the extremely cold climate of Northrend had covered every brick on this castle with a thick layer of ice, which was a very good defensive bonus. Unfortunately, the continuous bombardment of the Dalajan, especially the fire elemental attacks, had melted a lot of the ice on the wall. There was no need for armor-piercing shells, just high-explosive shells could blast a big hole in the wall. A volley of cannons, concentrated at the foot of the wall, directly blasted a big hole. The city wall's own weight easily crushed the city wall itself. In just a few blinks of an eye, more than 10 huge gaps at least 10 meters wide had appeared on the city wall. That's enough. Let's go. Chapter 1678. After working with the Alliance for a long time, little Xiaofan had also developed the ability to coordinate artillery, mechanized armor, and scattered soldiers. Seeing that the Alliance's tanks were the first to charge forward with their tanks, the beast men did not fall behind. They ran at full speed, perfectly matching the rhythm of the attack, and broke into the city from the east. In the south of the city, because the Daligen had spat out a large amount of sand and gravel, the tornado wall could not carry any more sand and gravel away. Most of the sand and gravel fell to the west and south. This formed a natural siege slope. There was no need for siege ladders or anything like that. The Forsaken could just rush up the slope and reach the city wall. For eternal death. Anastrian pointed with his finger, and the Forsaken under his command immediately began to charge, as if they were going to break the river with a flick of their whip. The process of taking over the City of Calamity was a little boring. Just as the Sun King had predicted, the Undying inside were not the main force. Although there were many of them, most of them were low-level undead such as skeleton soldiers and zombies. Not to mention the Liches and Death Knights that were the core of the Calamity army, even high-level banshees and abominations were rarely seen. Delano split a large skeletal warrior in half with his axe, then stomped on it with his thick metal boots. The skull of the skeletal warrior disintegrated into a pile of white debris on the spot. Just like Father said, the Doomsday Army is likely to give up on the Calamity City, huh? However, the resistance in the City of Calamity was still quite fierce. There were no high-level undead soldiers, but almost every building in the city that was slightly taller had been modified into a spirit tower. These defensive magic buildings that were full of the cursing sect style were quite annoying. Above the spirit tower was a spirit crystal that was suspended in the air. As long as it was a disciple of the lowest level of the cursing sect, they would be able to control this soul crystal to attack any living beings within a 200-meter radius. This kind of attack on the soul level could not be defended by conventional means. The power of vengeful spirits could easily penetrate any armor in the world and directly hit one's soul. Many of the places where the spirit towers were set up were quite dangerous, and most of them were surrounded by multiple buildings. From afar, one could not even see them, much less use artillery fire. Without the Alliance's paladins, the Horde could only rely on human lives to fill the gap. Using the charging soldiers to draw away the Spectre Tower's firepower, and relying on the Spectre Tower's low attack frequency, they immediately called for the Alliance's tanks to charge over and fire at close range, forcibly destroying the Spectre Tower. Watching his compatriots fall one by one, Delano felt as though his flesh was being cut off. The only fortunate thing was that this was not the end for the Orc warriors. Before the war, Thrall had reached an agreement with Anastrian. If the Orcs died on the battlefield, Thrall would allow the Forsaken to resurrect them and let them continue to fight as warriors of the Horde. However, they would be included in the ranks of the Forsaken. In a war, soldiers were expendable. If the same life could be used up twice, then, at the very least, it could reduce the casualties of the living. This was a type of bitterness, a type of helplessness. 3 hours later, just as the Allied forces were about to completely occupy the City of Calamity, news of the appearance of Arthas and Maligos suddenly came from the west and northwest. In the command post of Naxxramas, Magni yelled, "Direct attack, hoo 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 hoo." The wind was howling, accompanied by a terrifying white beam that traversed the sky. Naxxramas, the flying fortress, shook violently. That was not a terrifying impact that could shake the earth and mountains. If it was a simple energy cannon attack, it might not have been so terrifying. What was truly terrifying was that this was a rare dual elemental attack. The deep and evil shadow element and the bone-chilling ice element. Although these two types of energy did not conflict with each other, but they were not related, they were perfectly blended together to form an unparalleled and terrifying attack. At this time, Jaina was in charge of the fortress's magic defense. As one of the Alliance's 3 existing magic powerhouses, Jaina's strength could not be said to be weak. The moment the magic mirror captured Arthas's figure, Jaina turned on the fortress's magic shield to the maximum. Naxxramas was no longer the fortress it had been under the control of the Calamity Army. After falling into the hands of the Alliance, it had been expanded, reinforced, and strengthened many times. The latest strengthening was after Duque became a demigod, and a new layer of magic protection array was added to the surface of Naxxramas. Originally, after Duque obtained the Titan rune magic inheritance from Maligos, he had planned to strengthen it again. Unfortunately, due to time constraints, he did not have the time to do this. Even so, Naxxramas's magic protection ability was still quite terrifying. Even such a Naxxramas could not withstand this attack. Using the energy of thousands of wronged souls, Frostmourn's fury was ignited. This well-prepared attack easily pierced through Naxxramas's shield. Jaina did not even have time to use the elements of the magic net before the 3 layers of shield collapsed in front of her. With a terrifying roar, the east side of the fortress at a 45-degree angle with the ground, an area the size of 3 football fields, was penetrated. It entered from below and exited from above. If it wasn't for Magni controlling the fortress to the side at the last moment, it might have hit the command post directly. Contact was instantly lost in the 5 districts. There were more than 1,000 Alliance soldiers there. This was not all of the casualties. As the terrifying soul power spread, with the penetrated area as the center, at least 4,000 people in the 32 large spaces around it fell silently. They were all directly hit by the soul attack, and the souls in their bodies were directly annihilated. They died just like that. They did not even have the chance to become immortals before they became corpses. This was not the end. In the further areas, countless soldiers suffered a mental shock equivalent to Banshee's wail. The degree of damage depended on how far away they were from the damaged area and how strong their souls were. It was no exaggeration to say that this attack alone caused at least 30,000 casualties in Naxxramas. 1/3 of the entire fortress functions were paralyzed. The damage caused by the dual attributes of frost and shadow wasn't over yet. With the breach in the fortress as the center, extreme cold was spreading rapidly. A huge ice lump was forming. It was as if it had a life of its own, sucking in frost elements from all directions. It became bigger and heavier. In less than 10 seconds, everyone in the fortress felt that the fortress was tilting due to the sudden additional weight. Looking at the magnified image of the Lich King Arthas standing on the broken dome of the Dark Cathedral, leaning on his sword and wearing a full set of heavy armor, everyone in the command post sucked in a cold breath. Chapter 1679. The strength of demigods is indeed very different. With this level of destructive power, if you say Arthas is a true god, I'd *King believe it. Magni cursed, turned his head, and directly activated the highest level of magic transmission. Duque. The idiot you were talking about is here. If you don't come over, you'll be collecting my corpse. Almost as soon as Magni shouted for help, the surroundings changed. Arthas, don't be too arrogant. With a loud sound, 2 huge slender figures jumped out of the void around Naxxramas, taking huge steps, stepping on the air, and pouncing straight at Arthas. The Kiraj twin emperors, very standard demigod powerhouses. Their huge bodies could be seen clearly from far away. Go! Insect Emperor! Kill Arthas! On the cannons of Naxxramas, on the flying battleships around, every Alliance soldier who saw the big boss powerhouses attack cheered. If it was the Kiraj twin emperors of the past, of course they wouldn't be able to fly. After being killed by Duque, their souls melted into the magic net and became elemental creatures, so it was too easy for them to fly. The two emperors, whose minds and lives were connected, charged straight at a terrifying speed. The Sword Emperor took the lead, the Courage Emperor sword slashing down heavily with the momentum of Mount Tai. The Demon Emperor waved his staff, and two magic, one left and one right, made two wonderful arcs, just brushing past the left and right sides of the Sword Emperor's body. If there were no accidents, the three attacks would land on Arthas at the same time. What a Lich King! As the representative of the villain's attractiveness. As a top-level existence among demigods. Arthas used his strength to prove that he wasn't a pushover. Facing the simultaneous attacks, he didn't retreat, but advanced. With a tap of his foot, an ice mountain rose up from beneath him. No! This was no longer the concept of rising. The huge ice flower exploded under Arthas's feet, and the violent recoil sent his whole body shooting into the sky like an arrow from a bow. With a speed even faster than the Sword Emperor, Arthas charged towards the Sword Emperor. The Sword Emperor's eyes suddenly widened. In his field of vision, the black-armored, white-haired figure was rapidly growing larger at a speed faster than he could react to. Ah! Among all the martial arts in the world, only speed was unbeatable. In front of Arthas's absolute speed, the Sword Emperor felt as if his movements were as slow as a snail. Before he could make the slightest change of direction, a bright black ray of light had already passed through his slightly narrow abdomen. A wave of pain that they hadn't felt for a long time was transmitted to the souls of the two brothers. They had long since abandoned their physical bodies. Injuries to their physical bodies would not bring them pain, but the pain in their souls would make them feel even more tormented. It wasn't over yet. Taking advantage of the moment she slashed at the Sword Emperor, the smaller Arthas rushed past the Sword Emperor's waist. She tapped the back of the Sword Emperor's waist with the tip of her foot, and her entire body accelerated once again. It was as if she had turned into a black cannonball, heading straight for the Demon Emperor. Humph! Come! The Nephilim King unleashed a large flame blast. The condensed high-purity fire elemental ball exploded like a small blooming sun. Arthas didn't dodge. Her entire body was surrounded by an extremely cold aura. She completely broke through the surface with a single point. She gathered the frost elemental around her and rushed over in one breath. This scene could be described in one sentence. Vec Lore wanted to kill Second Fool with an egg. Second Fool didn't want to talk to Vec Lore, so he used a stone to burst Vec Lore's egg. The Lich King's high strength and mystery easily destroyed the Demon Emperor's low concentration of elemental energy. Facing the aggressive Arthas, the Demon Emperor still wanted to rely on his physical immunity to take a blow from Frostmourne. Arthas seemed to have seen through the Demon Emperor's thoughts. He didn't even use his sword and directly stretched out his empty left hand. The seemingly small palm suddenly pressed on the Demon Emperor's forehead. From under the Lich King's heavy black full-cover helmet, only these two words popped out, I seal. Just for a moment. The Courage twin emperors, whose strength had undoubtedly stepped into the demigod realm, burst out a ball of light representing annihilation at the same time. It was like the last second of a candle's candlelight. After bursting out, there was no more sound, and it completely dissipated in mid-air. The Alliance soldiers who witnessed this scene were all stunned. No one thought that the two demigods belonging to the Alliance would be so easily knocked down in 2 moves. The ferocity of the Lich King was deeply imprinted in their minds at this moment. Is Arthas really that strong? In the next second, the fear of the Alliance soldiers was immediately calmed. It was very simple, because a powerful existence riding a black dragon appeared in the sky above Naxxramas. He was, of course, the supreme commander of the Alliance, Duke Marcus, and his mount, the Earth Guardian dragon Onyxia. Huh! Arthas, you really surprised me. How dare you run out of your white turtle shell? Duque looked down at Arthas condescendingly, and his contemptuous voice spread throughout the airspace through the elemental vibration of the magic net. Every Alliance soldier couldn't help but let out the loudest cheers after hearing Duque's voice. Long live the Alliance! Long live His Excellency Duke Marcus! Our commander is the strongest. That's right, in the hearts of the Alliance people, only Duque was the ultimate strong. The failure of the Karaji twin emperors was certainly a setback. But as long as Duque did not fall, the Alliance people would have a firm belief in their hearts. Brilliant victories again and again, great achievements that were enough to be sung through the ages, forged this confidence that would not be easily destroyed and obliterated. The morale that had just fallen slightly immediately rose again. Arthis seemed to be disgusted with the recovery of the Alliance people's morale, and said coldly, "Sure enough, if you hit your dogs, they will run out. Unfortunately, if those 2 dogs just now were alive, they could be used to guard the door." Duque's facial muscles twitched, and his left eye narrowed slightly. It must be admitted that Arthis's attack was indeed effective. If the Karaji twin emperors were still the pair of bosses in the temple, it was estimated that they would have completely knelt by now, and even their souls would have been sucked into Frostmourne, and they would have completely become the slaves of the Lich King. However, since they were included in the magic net, their souls no longer belonged to them, and the core of their souls had long since become a part of the magic net. What Arthis had just knocked down was only a soul projection that had part of its soul and was filled with a large number of elements. Being beheaded, of course, would be greatly damaged, but after resting for a while, they could still recover their strength and come out again. As for how long it would take, Duque was not sure. There was no doubt that Arthis took advantage of the gap when Duque did not personally come to the front line, and in the end, dealt a heavy blow to the Alliance camp. You're tuning in to the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.